It is 6 o'clock, and I call the August 22nd, 2023 City Commission meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Mayor Hattasol.
Here.
Commissioner Butler.
Here.
Commissioner Motta.
Here.
Commissioner Morris.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will start with the first item, which is the off-site stormwater best management practices, whatever, study update, that thing. Okay,
Thank you, Mayor.
yeah.
Rob Ott, Director of Public Works. I'm going to introduce a few city staff. Tonight seems to be Public Works tonight with 3 items, stormwater, as well as utility rate discussions on water, wastewater, and stormwater. The first 2 topics really are a discussion. The third presentation, we're very close to publishing. So hopefully we're at the 98% solution, and we can move those standards and requirements forward for the community. So I'm going to introduce Bill Heatherman. He's our stormwater management engineer. We also have in the audience Karen Becker, who's our principal civil engineer. Leon Brown, landscape architect for the city of Manhattan. Helps out a lot in stormwater. Came over from private sector. I won't say how many years of experience, but wealth of knowledge helped us out. Mr. Brian Johnson in the back corner, city engineer. And you'll hear from Randy later this evening on water and wastewater. So with that, Bill, I'll let you go ahead and get started and introduce your team per topic. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. We have 3 policy-oriented presentations tonight. The first one is
Bill, would you want to push one of those microphones that you're going to speak into instead of in the middle? That won't work. The middle won't work.
how about that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
So we have 3 water quality stormwater oriented presentations tonight on policy. The first is a water quality fee in lieu for water quality treatment study that we're undertaking with Kansas State University, and we have tonight Dr. Tricia Moore with Carl and Melinda Helwig, Department of Biological and Agricultural Engineering. And we also have her colleague, Nathan Hendricks, with the Department of Ag Economics at K-State. And they'll speak a little bit on this. But let me get the purpose of this study is to look at a potentially innovative program that would allow development community to have another tool in the toolbox for meeting the Clean Water Act requirements that they have for water quality. And we're just doing a feasibility study at this time, but we'll talk tonight about the basic concept, the toolbox, some regulatory considerations, and some outreach we've done for partners that would help us in that program. Then we'll finish up with some concepts on adoption and timelines. But the concept in general is right now developments larger than an acre or even smaller when they're part of a larger common plan have a duty under the Clean Water Act to do permanent BMPs. So you see the erosion control during construction, but these are the more permanent green features like bioretention cells, extended wetlands. Sometimes they're concrete filtration chambers that are under the parking lot. Any number of products or practices, they are effective, they're important for protecting the environment, but they can be costly, they can be difficult to maintain. And this is not just experienced locally, this is a national topic of discussion. The City of Wichita in 2015 pioneered an off-site compliance program, which is really quite innovative, not just for Kansas, but throughout the Midwest. And they pioneered getting approval on that through KDHE. They had some special things happening with watershed protection in their area that made that kind of a natural discussion for them. KDHE is on board with the way the Wichita program has worked and with other kinds of alternative compliance strategies that might allow development community to meet their obligations at less cost and more sustainable future. So we wanted to look at that here, whether that would be a tool that would work well in the city of Manhattan. And to kind of expand on the City of Wichita's experience and what we've looked at in our study, I'll introduce Dr. Moore, who has actually worked with both communities.
All right. Thank you, Bill. So I'm going to speak a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts of how a program such as this would work. First, we identify pollutants of concern. So as Bill mentioned, this is part of the Clean Water Act, and so we have a framework for addressing specific pollutants in our water bodies that impact our ability to use them. With this, we then consider practices in agricultural land. So here the fee in lieu is to fund practices upstream that can be potentially, or that would be implemented in a more cost-effective manner, but that are still addressing those specific pollutants of concern. There's a system for tracking those pollutants, or we call it credits of sorts. By adopting or by implementing one of these water quality practices in agricultural landscapes, those agricultural producers would receive compensation, or that fee would be going to those ag producers for implementing these practices, again, to provide credits that are addressing these pollutants of concern. That compensation is provided by developers within the city of Manhattan who would opt in to participate in this fee in lieu. So rather than constructing one of those permanent features that Bill introduced, they would pay into a fund that the city would operate and manage that would ultimately be financing these practices upstream in agricultural landscapes. With this sort of arrangement, as Bill mentioned, the KDHE is supportive, but as we develop it, we think about ensuring that the city is still meeting its regulatory requirements under the Clean Water Act. And as I mentioned, it is a voluntary program, so what this would do is, like Bill said, provide another tool so that the city and the developers developing within the community can meet these regulatory requirements, either by constructing a permanent feature on the site or by paying into this fund that's financing practices upstream in the agricultural areas. To give you an idea of some of the agricultural practices we've identified that address specific pollutants of concern in our surrounding water bodies, we're thinking about things like cover crops and no-till on agricultural cropland. These ensure there's root structure and permanent vegetation to help retain various pollutants. Contour terraces and waterways, or rehabilitation of existing contour terraces and waterways that are no longer functioning well. Livestock management, which is essentially moving cattle out of the creek so that they are not directly depositing pollutants into the stream. And then stream bank stabilization, where you're addressing erosion, so really getting at some of the sedimentation issues that we have in our watershed. So this is kind of a suite of practices that this type of program would be able to fund. In terms of where those practices would be funded, we've identified some candidate areas around the city. These include areas in Riley County and Pottawatomie County that drain into Tuttle Creek, the Wildcat Creek watershed, and then downstream of Tuttle Creek, the Blue River, and then the Kansas River, approximately as it flows between Ogden and St. George. And so all of these water bodies, they're selected for their proximity to Manhattan, but we can also tie some of the benefit to the community potentially as well by keeping it in these nearby watersheds. From the regulatory standpoint, as Bill mentioned, we do need a framework or some way of basing this program. And so we are addressing this by focusing on pollutants of concern, namely sediment, as well as nutrients and fecal bacteria. So these are all pollutants that impair those watersheds or the water bodies I just mentioned. So for this, we can define the watersheds in which we would be working. And then by approximating the amount of pollutant load coming from our urban areas versus agricultural areas, and we can do that with best estimates from the literature, what we would do from the regulatory standpoint is then apply, you see that, a 2-to-1 ratio. So this is something that the KDHE has suggested or maybe more strongly than just, but recommended in terms of providing that offset. So for every, for example, 2 pounds of sediment produced from an on-site property, we would want to offset that with 2 pounds of sediment upstream. All of this, again, is based on our best available research and estimates of those pollutant loads. And so with this, by basing it on what we know to be the best science, we can provide a basis for the program, but then show that we're still meeting KDHE requirements, or the permit requirements, in terms of addressing water quality issues. We have some flexibility, or we're thinking in a flexible manner, so that as there may be changes in EPA guidance that the KDHE then carries out, then the program can adapt to that as well. But those are some of the regulatory considerations, and that 2-to-1 ratio being kind of a key part of that. In terms of the business plan, we've established basic units of measure for how we think this program would operate. Essentially, we would use a pollutant of concern, namely sediment. That sort of becomes the currency of the program. We are then working to establish a fee. So we mentioned this, a fee in lieu. So we would set a fee that is going to offset, again, for every unit of sediment that would be generated on site, to be able to pay for practices that are going to offset twice or double that amount. This is where I'll just turn to my colleague Nathan here. This is really his area of expertise, both in the economics of agricultural production systems, but then also in thinking about how to frame incentive programs such as this would be. So this is where Nathan and I are working through thinking about what the fee will be, how those payments to producers will work, the cost to our liaison group, which I'm going to jump to in just a moment, and then any other administrative costs. So we're taking all of those into consideration as setting this fee. I'm going to go down and just mention the Ag Liaison Team. So a big part of this program, and it's working and kind of looking at the experience with Wichita, is having a group that's already working in the watershed, that has the trust and relationship with those agricultural producers, whether they be growing crops or raising livestock. And so we've identified several partners or ag liaisons through various conservation programs, the county conservation offices, who have expressed interest in assisting with this. So they would be providing that link between the city and then providing technical expertise, as well as ensuring that those practices are continuing to be in place in the agricultural landscape. So that, again, as we look to meeting permit requirements, we want to have a means for ensuring that those practices are permanent as well. And so I'll turn it back over to Bill to discuss some of the fiscal city considerations.
So thank you, Dr. Moore. So additional business plan considerations are just how would the city set up and operate a fund of this type, some fiscal policy, some ordinance revisions and resolutions would be needed to make it happen. We would need to prepare formal documents to KDHE and get their blessing that this is covered by the permit, but there's already provisions in the permit to make that fairly reasonable to do. A couple of practical issues is right now when you build a project and you're doing a best management practice, you're really looking at a construction item, a capital cost that you spend the money up front. All of these ag practices are really built on annual contracts, incentive payments, so you kind of have a timing of the cash flows part to do. Wichita was no different. They actually addressed that mainly by, instead of requiring any capital payment up front, they've set it up under their utility structure that there's just an additional fee that the property pays over time, so that every year you got money coming in and money going out. That works for most projects, but there could be some projects because of bond funding or that type of thing that the project owner really needs to make a lump sum payment, and so we would have to work out the mechanics of those. None of those seem particularly daunting, but they all just have some time that would have to be spent to sort that out. We've also looked a little about the utilization. I mean, what is the market demand for this? If we look back over the last 3 years for projects that have needed some type of permit requirement, we're averaging about 30 to 35 acres a year in about 8 projects. Wichita's experience was only about a third of the projects actually took them up. Wichita has some different rules, so a lot of larger subdivisions were building big ponds anyway. Once you built a big pond, you've kind of met both goals. But what they really found was that the projects 5 acres and smaller, commercial, Quick Trip, those types, they readily appreciated the ability to do that versus building some expensive structure under their parking lot. So they were seeing about a third. I think in our context, a third would be almost the minimum I would expect to see. I would anticipate a little bit more. So if you're doing 30 a year after 10 years and half of them take you up, that's about 150 acres worth of development that we are, needing to continue to maintain off-site credits for. And it is a in perpetuity type program in that as long as the development is there, that obligation to annually be meeting a water quality goal is there. So we have to think about the sustainability and how to keep that going if we were to go down this step. So that's the part that the business plan is looking at, and that's the part that we're still working on with the study. But that's the concept overall. As I mentioned, KDHE is on board, and our permit is already pre-written to allow fairly expeditious adoption of an alternative compliance strategy. We're probably more limited simply by the decisions we need to make and some staff time for implementation if that were the direction that we chose to go. So I don't want to say a hard date, but really it could come online fairly quickly. Wichita had a longer implementation period because they were kind of buying up credits with ag producers before they made it available. I think our feel from KDHE is they might allow us to shrink that. Wichita was the very first one. They were being very cautious. But it would probably take a year or two to get the ag producer side fleshed out. That would probably be the longer piece of the implementation is to have the credits implemented in the field. So with that, we would be happy to take any questions you might have and perhaps hear any feedback you have on direction forward.
So there's always been, you got to take care of stormwater, and we've talked about a fee in lieu of stormwater detention. Is there a separate pollutant retention solution thing you have to also do, or is this the one and the same? The pollution falls under the stormwater runoff issue?
They're related, but they're two distinct requirements. The detention, which historically been flood management, and then as of 2012, for the City of Manhattan, the Clean Water Act side, which is pollutant oriented. Sometimes the same practice works for both. Sometimes a development has something going on for both. And now that we have the fee in lieu of water, or fee in lieu of detention, those projects still have a water quality duty, and that's still a design issue for projects.
So in theory, if somebody build a 12-plex and put a bunch of, once they got it built and they can take their straw things around their stormwater things off of there, and they get nice green grass growing, and there's no other runoff of soil, whatever, they're still sort of obligated to continue to, in this scenario, provide a payment, even though they're maybe not even generating any more silt or stuff, or how's that work?
Yeah, so the literature on urban runoff shows that you still have continued pollutant discharge long after construction, whether it be sediments, bacteria, and nutrients. And so under the Clean Water Act provisions, there's a duty in a whole separate category that developments do things long-term, separate from, in addition to what they had to do during construction.
Go ahead, John.
So the way I understand this, you've got the upstream, the agricultural person doing stuff that, let's say, the residential person or the residential development is going to pay an ongoing fee so they can keep doing their good stuff upstream, so to speak. Within the formula, is there money set aside for the administration of the program? In other words, you talk about how the city would have to do it and administer it and all that. So is part of that fee that's being paid by the residential enough to pay for the agricultural person's work and some left over to pay for the administration? Or is that administration all in the city?
No, the fee would be set so that it covers the whole program turnkey, and so that would be
Okay.
part of the financials.
Linda, go ahead.
I do have a question. As I look at the watershed area, I know there's a CAFO in the northern part of the county, and are we going to be having to deal with runoff from a facility like that?
So we haven't necessarily gotten that deep into exactly which producers might fall under, but in terms of livestock management, I think the thinking is for a conventional pasture operation. A true CAFO, confined animal feeding operation, would be under a whole separate set of regulatory requirements. I would doubt that we want to get into something that complicated. This would be for, your normal rancher producer.
Because this goes clear pretty far north. It seems like something that we should work with K-State on. And are they going to actually be paying something for the fee in lieu business?
So
Or are we going to?
one of the
as
reasons we
K-State?
partnered
They have a lot
with,
of land.
oh, you mean K-State
Yeah.
as landowner?
Yeah.
Again, we haven't necessarily gotten to that stage of who all the producers are that may be eligible to participate. The producer payment part is kind of modeled on programs that are already in existence that are reaching out to private farmers on a voluntary basis, like the Conservation District already has, or the Kansas Water Office already has programs like that. And K-State has done an excellent job at kind of helping guide us to this point. Actually, Dr. Moore plays an administration role with the city of Wichita, and so I think they're open to having a discussion about that with us during implementation, but we haven't necessarily dictated the exact team.
I think I have confidence in the advice and information. I want to be sure that the administration at K-State is the kind of partner we want to work with. I don't see them necessarily paying in lieu of fees. So anyway, I'd like to make sure that gets worked out. I'd like for us to proceed cautiously. I'm not interested in jumping in with both feet necessarily, because I don't know what's down the road and how it works. It seems like Manhattan is taking a lot of responsibility for surrounding ag area, and I probably need a day-long briefing, Bill, on how this is gonna work. Because I'm not water-oriented like you, and I am not ag-oriented like our K-State people here.
So, for example, like on all of these big K-State projects they've got potentially planned on the north side of Kimball, because the water runs to the north and stuff like that, they're gonna be obligated, the building they got now, the hotel, the condos, the ag buildings, every building they build out there has to address potential pollutant runoff and stuff off of their land. Is that correct? Just like the Midtown project in downtown Aggieville and everything else that we're doing across the city.
So,
That's a good
Yeah.
question, Mark.
yes, but with a caveat. So when it's the K-State Foundation, when it's several of the entities that operate
Taxable.
as a taxable entity, then they clearly fall under. We do get into a little bit of an issue on campus itself, just because the state as an entity is not necessarily subject to our direct regulation. So they would be seeking ways to meet their Clean Water Act obligations through their state channels.
Okay.
We have not historically permitted like campus buildings.
Right.
But the stuff north of Kimball, I think much of that has come through. In fact, several of the projects have come through review and have had provided water quality features.
So a lot of those detention ponds they're building up there were strictly considered, well, for stormwater stuff, or are some of those gonna address their pollutants and silt and runoff and stuff too, you think?
So the two large regional basins that are under construction now were designed based on detention only. Now, as they do development, they have the option of proposing, if it's valid, technically, perhaps ways to also try to address water quality. But in the original design, that was not a high goal, I don't believe. And if we needed to dig in deeper, I wasn't as directly involved in those designs, but somehow each development, assuming it's under city regulation, does have that obligation to meet a water quality goal. A lot of discretion then is given to the project sponsor to propose under our manual the different way that they might want to do that.
So on any specific project, by doing this, it's not going to prevent any of the pollution from that project. You're going to prevent twice as much of it upstream somewhere else, so that for the Riley County area and all the water that comes through Manhattan and goes on to Lawrence, there's going to be a net decrease by half, hopefully, by doing this project.
If you look at the watershed as a whole, as it eventually reaches the Kansas River,
Yeah.
then it would be a decrease. Now, the factor of a half, I think the state would say part of that is because there's an awful lot of uncertainty
Right.
about the effectiveness. They want to make sure that it's at least more than one.
Yeah.
And that half is a hedge for all the uncertainties.
So we can't fix everything in Manhattan, but by fixing some of the stuff outside of town, it'll more than compensate for the stuff we can't sort of stop and track and prevent in town. Or we're willing to make that trade, do something else upstream that we can't necessarily do in town, and hopefully it's more than one,
Right.
into one.
Kind of a regional greater good versus each exact pipe, being.
Okay.
And the state in particular, as we all know, Tuttle Creek has long-term management issues. So even though we don't drain into Tuttle Creek, we're part of that region. And I think the state is particularly interested in seeing partnerships around Tuttle Creek Reservoir.
When you got,
Yeah, just, it seems interesting that, you use the term, they can't do the water quality thing. Is that true? Or is this just a case where I pay money and not have to worry about it? In other words, I can pollute in my little project as long as I pay money, so the agricultural guys don't. That really doesn't make sense to me. That's not solving the issue. That's just moving it to somebody else.
I don't think the word can't is the right one. It's a question of cost and impact and whether there's, the idea of credit trading in environmental realm is gaining credence with the idea that if we can solve if we can reduce the issue at a macro scale and find the most economically efficient way to do that, is that a desirable policy?
Okay, what kind of monetary savings does the city get out of this? Because obviously we're gonna pick up some more administration and stuff. So is this cheaper than what we're doing now, or more expensive?
The city's current financial outlay is primarily tied up in just plan review, what it costs for us to review and inspect projects. Right now, the entire cost of implementing is borne by the private sector, unless it's one of our own projects, and we have to meet that duty ourselves. And the idea is that any fee that we might adopt would be revenue neutral. It would have to cover its costs. That would be the concept. So we shouldn't really gain or lose. Now, there is obviously always a certain amount of staff time involved in just managing any program, and so that would probably be the bigger policy decision.
Yeah, so that's the question. When you say to be revenue neutral, we're obviously gonna need more staff or more staff time, so that's gonna drive up costs, and the fees aren't gonna cover that.
So the city of Wichita's experience has been that they've been able to use the partners pretty effectively. So whether it's kind of partnerships with Conservation District or whatnot, I believe the city, for the most part, it kind of has to keep track of the books, but a lot of the field implementation, they've been able to develop partnerships where you're paying for it, but it's not necessarily a city staff person with full benefits, employed by the city of Manhattan that has to do the lion's share. And again, that's all part of implementation. If we went forward, we would, and this feedback on what kind of program would be desired or not desired is very helpful.
Okay, what about the developers? Is there any information on how they feel about this one way or the other? Is it beneficial for them in their development to go this route in lieu of, or is it not beneficial?
So we're presenting this kind of study hot off the press, I guess, if you will, to this body today, knowing that we wanted to inform you first before we started, talking details. I will tell you informally, the feedback has been that it seems like there would be a lot of desire to see this option at least. And the feedback in Wichita is even the developments that aren't necessarily directly using it do appreciate the fact that they have a way of kind of gauging their choices. So I haven't heard a lot of objection from the development community to the idea of having this option, but we wanted to tell you about it first before we did much more on consultations.
Okay, and then all these agricultural folks out there, I know we talked one time about containment ponds up north, and a bunch of them came down here and they were quite hostile about working with the city. So has anybody reached out to them? I mean, how cooperative are they gonna be about this?
So we're being very careful on that front as well. The idea would be this is not the city going out and knocking on producers' doors and saying, hey, we got a deal for you. It would only really work if we work through these ag liaisons. And one of the reasons this region of potential this watershed was drawn so large is we don't want any one sector in Wildcat or Riley or Potawatomi to think that somehow we're zeroing in on you. This would just be another tool in the ag toolbox, which they are already very familiar. There's quite a few incentive payment-oriented programs, even more than 10 years ago, different private groups with goals. So there's starting to be an awful lot of opportunities out there. And one thing we've heard is actually many of the federal programs are good to start with, but they have early cutoff limits, or they have this kind of rule that makes it hard for one. So one idea that has been mentioned is a program like this for marketing to the ag producers might be able to be designed to bridge some gaps, because it could be a little bit more flexible and kind of cover some of those coverage times where the federal programs might lapse.
So if a farmer needed a new set of terraces to rehab their terraces, and it's going to be $5,000 to do that, are we thinking we'd be able to provide them half, 2/3, 20%? Any ideas how's that working out? Is it, and then what's their obligation? They got to fill out a 20-page form every year with USDA or KDHE because they're now taking money to help rebuild their terraces. What about how does that working currently? What can they expect? What could a farmer expect to get? Obviously, the incentive is to, if they're going to have somebody's going to help them rebuild their terraces, yeah, sign me up for that if I got to do it anyway. I'm just curious as to what's going to be the incentive to our agricultural people to do this. If it's simply a grant to help pay for half their terrace, I think they'd sign up left and right. If it's a much bigger deal where they now got to put water monitoring pumps at the bottom of every waterway or some damn thing, then it's not a good deal anymore. Maybe Dr. Moore or somebody can address that.
Yeah, I think I'd like if Dr. Moore or Dr. Hendricks might address that.
Ag Econ guy, you're here. Come on up, Nathan. That sounds like a question for you.
I mean, a lot of this is still to be worked out. And I think the way we determine that, how much the payment is, we'd have to say, okay, what would that restoration of the terrace, what kind of water quality impact would that have? And so, how much dollars per reduction in sediment, does that make sense given what the developer is going to have to pay? And is it the terrace that would be more cost effective, or would it be cover crops or things like that? So then we could determine what that structure would need to be. And then I think how much we'd have to pay. The nice thing is like Bill mentioned, there are a lot of other programs that are already out there. So there's some good idea of what farmers are getting paid through other programs that gives kind of a benchmark of what they would be expecting to see in a payment. It's not, they haven't ever seen a cover crop payment or something like that before. So
then, and it's always going to be a grant. There's no repayment expected by the farmer for the money that they're getting to help make this thing happen.
Correct, right. And there wouldn't be a, Trish could get this, but I mean, the studies of what the water quality improvement, there's not going to be a a monitoring setup of how much sediment's coming off the field or anything like that. It's based off of what studies are showing is going to be that impact. And that's why there's that 2-to-1 ratio, because there's not going to be that measurement there.
All right, thanks. Well, as long as they, yeah, make it an option and it's, and one of those things where in 5 or 10 years, now it's the only option, I don't want that to be the case, but if we keep it optional, I suppose people sign up for it, they know what they're getting into. What else?
I recall that K-State doesn't have to comply with any of the city's regulations. So that is a caution. And sometimes they, but I also am interested, I have not heard you say county. I've heard you say conservation district, and this is a huge area with, and Riley and Potawatomi counties, and maybe Wabansie, I don't know, it depends on where the lines are. They would need to be involved in this. This is a big effort. I don't know that Manhattan can drive the train all by ourselves. I'd like for you to explore it, don't get me wrong, but I want to be sure. I don't want Manhattan residents to carry a burden, undue burden, whatever that means. Maybe
Yeah,
we're
are
thinking of the future
Are the
here.
rural areas under the same sort of clean water regulations, or does that fall under the state, or does the county have a counterpart like you over there that monitors county things? Or they fall under a bigger state deal, and there's nobody locally that worries about rural Riley County?
Have they ever filled their stormwater engineer position? Riley County?
I don't know about the county staffing
I don't either.
specifically.
They
We
used
we
to
have
one.
counterparts
He
at
retired, I know. Okay.
So the Clean Water Act is a big umbrella. There's lots of individual programs. The channel that comes to us is the one that's based on urban stormwater. So it's a function of our being an urbanized area that we fall under this set of rules. There are Clean Water Act, other programs, other requirements in agricultural areas, although historically, agricultural water pollution has been more incentives-based as opposed to regulatory-based, except for certain things like CAFOs and other things. So it's not that any one is completely exempt or not, but they are different channels. And what we are looking at is simply options for assisting development community that comes under the Manhattan regulatory framework of meeting their obligations.
So Manhattan has to do it, so the developers have to do it, so let's give them another option, and hopefully together they can pick one that's suitable for their project.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, it'll be better for the whole world because we're now solving the area problem by addressing the things we have to do anyway, more or
Yeah,
less.
I think it's fine, it's voluntary, and as long as the fees cover our administration, I think it'd be worthwhile to do.
So continue creeping forward. Go ahead, Wynn.
Yeah, I'm not sold entirely, but, it's worth, exploring further, because I still think, the other thing I think you mentioned was long-term, like if I develop a building here in town and go in lieu of, that's gotta be tracked indefinitely. Correct?
That's correct. There has to be a mechanism of making sure that 25 years from now, we can point to activity that is providing that pollutant reduction that you
So
forego.
I'm concerned that, the cost of that is gonna be higher than what it sounds like. I think you're gonna end up with a full-time city staff person, and we'll be kicking in capers, money, insurance, and all that, and I don't know if the fees are gonna cover that.
I think we'll look carefully at that with the last part of the study on the business plan and be prepared to answer that.
All right, there you go. Is this the end of the first item discussion, so that I should throw it open for public comment on this item, or you got something else on this particular item?
I have nothing more on this particular item.
Okay, have a seat for a sec. Is there anybody in the public that would like to comment on this thing we just heard about? I'm kidding. Stormwater Best Practices Study Update.
Gary Oles, 3308 Frontier Circle. Just a quick question. What does the stormwater fee that I currently pay will my water bill go to?
Stormwater runoff, flooding in the streets, getting the water into the river before it floods somebody's house or street or business,
And maintenance of those
and
systems.
maintenance of those systems.
But if I moved into a new house in a new development and the water bill had another fee on it for upstream sediment? No?
Is it more commercial only or residential?
Both.
Both. How are they handling the residential part then?
So it will be whatever those requirements are for the development. The developer, if it's a self-developed, would have some type of water quality requirements, which I can't stipulate at this point, but they'd have alternatives. You see more of these, I think, on larger scale development. So the developer that's developing this subdivision, as well as probably more commercial development, larger commercial developments where this would likely come into play more so.
Yeah. So on a residential, if the next big phase out at Colbert Hills, when they put 27 lots and the new streets and everything in there, how will they divvy up how do you expect that cost to address, how is that usually handled on new residential housing lots and stuff?
So Colbert Hills is a little bit of a special case because when they originally master planned, they did a lot of ponds and other things that were already kind of available. But if we're just talking about a greenfield development, because of the use of benefit districts, most likely any stormwater infrastructure, including whatever was being built, would probably be proposed as part of a benefit district. And so the assessments to each individual lot owner would effectively carry through that capital cost. If another alternative were used, then, you know, the assessments would be a little bit less, but you'd have this other fee. And again, I don't know that large single-family residential is going to be the most likely user of the program. Smaller commercial is probably where that cost curve is more beneficial, but we will see.
And this goes back a little bit to Commissioner Butler's question about development and developers. It's the infill projects that are very difficult in our existing, you know, whether it's the ward districts or whatever district that we're in, where you have a quality component that they need to provide, but it's kind of a postage stamp on their site. And this is intended to look at it to have a larger regional, so that would alleviate, you know, that postage stamp, because they're responsible for the maintenance of it in the future and so forth. But that's the intent, is for this to be more regional so that we gain greater benefit versus just little postage stamps here and there. And maybe that's not a good analogy, and Bill, correct me tomorrow morning, but that's kind of how I've looked at it a little bit. Is again, it's going to be independent on the facts of each case and so forth.
Any other public comment on this item? All right, thank you, Bill. We'll move on to item 2, which is,
When do you plan to bring something back to the commission on this potential watershed and fee in lieu of, and what's a timeline?
I think we want to make sure we can kind of reflect on the comments we got today.
Okay.
The study still has a couple months of work to do. I don't think we had set a firm date to come forward, but I think I've heard caution, so we won't be rushing anything through.
okay, very good. Item 2, tributary stream and detention basin maintenance policy study. Is that you still, Bill?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So item 2 tonight on policy is also a work in progress. Just like this first one, we have been doing a study to look at maintenance and how maintenance is handled here in peer communities for tributary streams and detention basins. Give me a second, let me bring up the right presentation. So as with the previous item, we'll do a bit of a project review, discuss the issues that we see on tributary streams and detention basins historically, talk about some of the peer communities that were interviewed and some of the data that we've gathered, and then we're prepared tonight to talk to you about potentially 2 baskets of recommendations for discussion and take any questions and feedback you have. Tributary streams and detention basins are each part of the stormwater system that are largely the responsibility of private property owners to maintain. And as many of you know, sometimes that goes smoothly and sometimes it can generate quite a few concerns and complaints, many that come to us, many that come to you. This has been tracked for a number of years, and a desire to at least take a good, hard, holistic look at how we do business, how we compare with our peers, and if there's any alternatives that we should be thinking about. The stormwater utility has helped us catch up on essential stormwater system repairs of the hard structure system, the part that's traditionally been understood to be a city responsibility. And at the margins, you know, where a tributary stream comes into a culvert or something might have allowed us to do a little bit of work that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to prioritize. But largely speaking, the stormwater utility did not change this division between what's considered public and private responsibilities. JEO Consultants, who's here with us tonight, was selected in 2022, and a study contract came before the commission in November for this study, and so we're at about the 75% point. We wanted to bring back this discussion and discuss the policy recommendations. We have 3 folks from JEO here tonight. We have Mark McCabe, who is the project manager. Mark has joined us remotely. We also have Elizabeth Motter, who was the project engineer and did a lot of the legwork, including interviews with the peer studies. And we also have Jason Peak, who's a principal with JEO. I'm going to ask Liz to come up and talk a little bit about the issues. Well, let me back up a step. I got one more slide that was mine to do here, so we'll do that in just a second. In terms of the study process that we used to get here, so there were interviews with city staff and management. There was a pretty thorough review of the policies and operating procedures that the city currently operates under. In terms of our system inventory, we have about 130 detention basins and over 90 miles of streams and engineered channels of some form. Most of those are private, some are in parks or have other reasons why the city already does more work on them. We did a careful look at our drainage complaint review, over 100 complaints over the last 4 or 5 years of different types. We made a dedicated field visit in April, hit 20 sites, took the bus out. It was a long day, but it was a good day. JEO looked carefully at about 9 of the locations that we pointed out to them and treated them as case studies, did kind of a deep dive. What's the policy history? What's the maintenance concerns we've had? We did some work with that 2D Wildcat Creek model that the city developed, really allowed us to look at the stream behavior in better detail than we've ever been able to do, so JEO did a little work on stream erosion potentials. And we talked with peer cities. JEO started with a list of 18 cities, did kind of a literature review, looked on their website, saw what they had, and then helped us narrow it down to 6 sites, 6 peer cities that were interviewed. And those were Topeka, Overland Park, Lenexa, Hutchinson, Norman, Oklahoma, and Lincoln, Nebraska. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what we learned in that process. I also did want to mention partnering with JEO was SMH Consultants, local consulting firm, and Jeff Hancock is here, and Jeff was been in on this study and was on the field trip with us as well and provided some good historical information. So with that, I'm going to invite Liz up here to talk about what our findings.
Thanks, Bill. So during our research, we found a couple of issues, but to begin, I'd like to talk to you guys about tributary streams. Tributary streams are an important asset in stormwater management because they help convey the water out of the city as well as provide natural habitat. Through our research, city staff has indicated that they intend to leave these tributary streams as natural areas for enjoyment and passive use. Our research indicated a couple of concerns with tributary streams. The first primary concern was stream bank erosion, which can threaten structures and properties as well as other city assets. Staff has indicated that buffer zones are often inadequate to address this issue. Other concerns include flooding, debris and fallen timber, as well as overall accessibility to the channel. We also discovered that there needed to be a fine balance between aesthetic concerns, which are done through clearing and mowing, and the need for conservation of natural areas. There's also an issue with upstream land use change, and this impact of upstream change being transferred to downstream users, where issues like sedimentation, erosion, and debris get transferred to the downstream side of things. Our research indicated that more frequent complaints were lodged within these natural streams, despite the fact that oftentimes it's the owner's obligation to maintain these areas. City staff indicated that their current primary tool for addressing issues within these natural streams is a benefit district cost share, but they also indicated that this cost share can be a daunting barrier to cross when actually trying to get these projects accomplished. So with this study of our policies and procedures, as well as the complaints, we also looked at the erosion risk analysis that Bill mentioned. We utilized that 2D model the city had already previously completed and looked at the maximum velocity. So on this map, you can see these pink and dark purple areas are places where erosion is more likely to occur within the downstream sections of Seco Park and Little Kitten Creek. In this analysis, it kind of shows that Little Kitten Creek is more likely and more susceptible to erosion. More information on this analysis will be included in our final report. With that, I'd kind of like to turn our attention to the detention basins. Detention basins are another critical asset in stormwater management because they help provide the critical stormwater control and also help fulfill those developer obligations that we talked about earlier. Detention basins are not simply passive assistance. They're very important. Our research showed 4 primary concerns. That's going to be sedimentation of the basin over time, degradation of outlet works and embankments, as well as concerns regarding mowing and aesthetics, as well as accessibility to the basin. The city also has a few underground vault systems that were mentioned earlier, but these systems have higher costs associated with them, as well as higher risks. City staff indicated that limited inspections have been done of these underground vault basins due to out-of-sight, out-of-mind mentality. Our research showed that complaints were rarely lodged regarding detention basins, but these systems still degrade over time. So the city wasn't brought in to address problems until they were major, where they're likely to be more costly and time constrained. This map shows the detention basin network throughout the city. Privately owned detention basins are in orange, and city-owned detention basins are in green. You can see that there are fewer detention basins in the older sections of town, and there are more detention basins in the more recently developed sections. This is due to different regulations. So that kind of consists of the issues our research brought forth. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Mark to continue discussing our Pure City findings.
Thank you, Liz. Good afternoon or good evening. So the issues that Liz and Bill presented really form the foundation of what we needed to sort of look at as criteria when we were looking at peer cities to interview. So as Bill mentioned, we did some initial screening of the cities via some web search and some literature reviews of what was available that we could see publicly. And that formed the first step in allowing us to move from a pod of 18 potential peer cities down to 6 to interview. And there was criteria that we were interested in based on what the issues were that we found within the initial part of the study. Sequentially, the peer city interviews were done after we sort of analyzed the information that was available from the city and from Public Works and Engineering. So those two combined really helped us shape the interview questions. We had a series of general questions for each of the interviewees, followed by specific questions once we were able to dig further into the peer cities information. So what you see on the screen here, most of the peer cities required detention basin inspections. We found that during the course of the interviews, there was a mix of just strictly water quantity basins, more for flood control. Those tend to be older. And then some of the newer developments had also water quality basins. A lot of the peer cities realized and continue to struggle with maintenance issues regarding debris within the channel and the impacts that it has during a heavy precipitation event. And we were able to extract some information on how they went about that and what their program included. Similar to Manhattan, they had a public-private mix of maintenance and who did what to certain public assets and how they track that maintenance. And it wasn't surprising to us knowing what we knew about Lenexa, and their program was pretty extensive. And they had some good examples that, as Liz mentioned, we have a final report that the detail is included in that. So if I could have the next slide. So all of this culminated into what we call the base level recommendations, and these also are presented in that study that was mentioned. So one of the key things that we found based on the comparison to what Manhattan currently was doing and some of the peers and what we were able to glean from the interviews was potentially recommending a revised policy dealing with debris in the channel, and perhaps figuring out a way to word it as such that if we could have the public or the private side be partnered with this and sort of perhaps bring this to the curbside where we could pick it up. So that was one that garnered interest with us. Another was the buffer. We talked a little bit about the issues there about maintenance and access and perhaps maintaining the aesthetics. So I think the buffer standards and guidelines would go a long way to sort of balance those two together. And a city conducted detention basin inspection, probably pretty comprehensive to establish a baseline in terms of what the current condition is. So we would have a starting point, or the city would have a starting point to begin looking at recommendations. And as Liz shared, the issues we were finding and some of the feedback was we would catch these, and the city would get these at a later deterioration rate, whereby the cost perhaps would be increased. Update and clarified code requirements and drainage. As we were putting this information together, we found and tried to map out all of the rules, requirements, and regulations, and we were finding that as we tried to connect them together, we were finding we couldn't bridge some of them, so there's probably some need to review those and get some clarity and create some linkages. And then update mapping documents library for covenants and easements. So really do sort of an inventory and document where these exist within the city, what exactly the type of easement and or covenant it is, and what the restrictions might be on that. So these are some of the base level recommendations that appear in that report. And I think I'm going to pass it to Bill to move to the next level of the enhanced recommendation.
Let me ask, does any community have a program that requires the owner to bring the debris to the street edge for the city to pick up? Is that realistic?
That is actually the City of Overland Park's policy. That's how they handle that particular issue.
I think it's hard to enforce. Anyway, thanks.
So yes, I mean, each one of these public-private connections, creates burdens and allocates burdens, and so that's kind of the challenge in all of this. So these were the base level recommendations, and I'm going to use recommendations loosely because these were baskets of options intended to provide some context for addressing these issues. The ones in the base level were ones that, although they may be challenging, we thought, could probably be done over time, basically with the staffing, the resources we have. I will say on the last bullet there, the update mapping document, we already have a lot of this mapped, but what we find is sometimes when we get calls, there's a whole paperwork chase of us looking for the covenants and finding, it's like you need a paralegal to start with just to figure out what somebody thought 15 years ago. We'd like to get that streamlined so we can kind of cut to the chase sooner in terms of how we react to things.
While you're on, go back.
Yes.
On the adopt stream buffer standard guidelines thing, are you thinking that on sort of new areas where there's a stream, or are we gonna try to go back in? Because obviously if the road, there's already been an erosion of 3 to 5 or 7 feet from 20 years ago, and now they're down to 6 feet before it takes their backyard fence out. What's, I don't know what to ask. How do we think what does that look like, or what does that look like having a buffer standard on something, in that situation where I talked about? If somebody's got if the Seco Park thing, person's got a retaining, not a retaining wall, just a fence or something, 3 or 4 feet from the bank edge, what are we thinking on a stream buffer deal, where what would that look like, or how do they do that? How do we do that? What does that look like?
So that second bullet is really for new development. It's
Okay.
a way of being proactive in avoiding some of the situations like you describe, and we'll actually previewing the new standards would talk about that criteria. Once you're in an existing, that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
That's where we go into the next slide, where we talk about if it got bad enough and some kind of project were needed to be done, how would we make projects like that feasible? But yeah, a Seco Park, those choices were made 3 and 4 and 5 decades ago.
Yeah.
And that's why we think it would be nice to avoid this and, continue to get better in newer areas.
So, okay, we can hopefully hopefully prevent things going forward and try to come up with some plan for what we're gonna do about the things in the past.
Right, and actually Seco and Little Kitten kind of make you can see a progression of 20 years of thinking just in terms of the setbacks. Now, that doesn't say Little Kitten doesn't have problems, but there's a marked difference between looking up Seco Creek Trib and looking up Little Kitten in terms of the setbacks that were used.
Good, okay.
And the erosion that has taken place over this time too. Some of their yards are really deteriorating.
Yes.
Okay, next slide.
Okay. So in terms of the enhanced basket, and the common thread through these is we're going to have a budget impact if we tackle them. But fundamentally, if we're going to change somehow the dynamic that we have right now between what the city does and what private owners do, there is a budget impact. So there's no escaping that discussion. But these would be the 4 items that, at least through the discussion so far and between the consultant's review and staff discussion, seem to have maybe the most starting point opportunity. The first is we really do need to more proactively have a program to have our detention basins inspected. All of our peer communities do that, including Topeka that most recently looked at it. And quite frankly, if you ask me right now, well, how many detention ponds do we have that are silting in, or how many do we, I don't know. I can tell you anecdotally from driving around, but we do not have a structured program for having even a 5-year report on the status of our detention basins that are privately owned. And as anyone who manages an asset would tell you, if you're not looking at your asset, it's not getting better on its own. So that seems to be a core element. The inspections we talked about in the slide before would be staff just doing very limited context just so we get better at knowing what we have, but they would not be able to really give the kind of information that a structured inspection program would go. Okay, now we inspect them. Okay, now we find problems. Then what, right? Why go inspect something if you don't have a real plan? And for the most part, they would be private responsibilities, but the question would be, do we want to have some kind of program that might allow a homes association to enter into some kind of partnership with the city one time to kind of catch up and address the things that have either kind of gone wrong through neglect, or which maybe in the very original design, in the late 1980s, doesn't seem like such a great design anymore. Would there be a mechanism to do that, and what might that look like? We don't have that fleshed out yet, but that's what the second bullet point is, a placeholder for the idea of potentially a one-time detention basin retrofit program. I will give the caveat, staff would only recommend that for the above-ground basins. The underground chambers under somebody's parking lot, that was a decision made to maximize land use, and it would be very hard to imagine how some kind of city-led project could proceed there without an awful lot of complications.
How many of those do we have?
You know, I can check the number.
Yeah.
It's a minority, but I'm sure there's at least 20.
Underground, okay. So do the homes along the Seacoast Trib and even Little Kitten, do they have homeowners associations? Is there some structure for the city to work with already, or would we be trying to
In most cases,
organize that?
in the vast majority of cases, there were covenants
Okay.
that were entered into. Now, the farther back in time you go, maybe the more problematic it might be to remind all those people of their duties and get them back together. But there was mechanisms put in place at the time of those, the vast majority of those developments.
Some of those are 50 years old anyway.
Yeah, I'm not aware of Seco Trib having a homeowners association, because we had to try to work, we tried to propose a benefit district there. There wasn't a majority of folks who wanted
Right.
to participate. The commission wasn't willing to establish one by public hearing, so it's just continued to deteriorate.
Yeah.
But the newer areas typically don't have the problems that
Right.
a 50-year-old development does.
A babbling brook becomes a gully. Okay.
And just for clarity, the Homes Association, the Business Association is really tied to when there's a detention basin, so that there's an active facility. The ones where it's really a natural stream, yeah, that's much more whatever seemed to make sense at the time of platting. More recent plats tend to make those conservation areas, and so those conservations do usually speak to responsible parties.
Yeah, I wanted to mention a little about Little Kitten Creek. Maybe, Rob, you can kick in, because, you know, over the years, there's been problems there. That stream, you know, is actually the property of the homeowners association that the mayor is part of, which is Sharing Brook. Though there's a hill there and the stream's below it, and then you know, Windsong, which we've only got 12 houses there. The stream really floods some of those houses every once in a while. I'm far enough away from it. It's never been a problem. But over the years, I know one time the city manager gave some assistance because a couple big trees fell down and people didn't want to pay to have them removed, and the fire department helped. I think the city kicked in $5,000, and then the homeowners paid for the rest and chainsawed the stuff up, you know, and got it out of there. And I know right now we got a big project because I think the bank eroded, since I've been there, from 88, about 7 feet, and it's impacting the city utilities. And so there's gonna be a major project to stabilize that bank right, very close to Anderson Avenue, because it looks like it'll undermine our street. Our street will go away otherwise, but you might fill in some other things on that, Rob.
No, I think you're correct, Commissioner, in your assessment in terms of the challenges with Little Kitten. And you got two different, I don't even know if you have an HOA, but you kind of have two different property owners, whereas one's obviously receiving perhaps more damages in terms of the erosion, and then also the threat of structures flooding because of all the debris piling up and blocking the capacity of the stream. So I think your assessment's correct, and there was some cost shares in order to clean up that stream after some significant rainfall events, because we felt like those structures were going to be threatened next time we had a large rain event, and they would have flooded. So,
Yeah, plus it impacts, there's a couple culverts under Anderson Avenue.
Yep.
And when all that debris comes down there, it jams them up, and then it goofs everything up, so.
yeah, it's not just going to conveniently pass underneath Anderson and create more challenges and so
But like
forth.
the current project they're working on, though, you might just clarify.
Yeah,
you know,
the
how
current
that came
project
about.
is an erosion, a bank stabilization project to protect sanitary sewer as well as storm sewer, as well as the only road that is public road that is accessible to a number of different homes north of Anderson Avenue and Windsong. So the bank, I think Bill and I walked it together and didn't catch too many ticks. And it's extremely steep and unstable. And the roadway is extremely close. And we're talking within just a few feet of that curb line. And it wouldn't take much of a significant rainfall event to continue to erode and possibly slough off that roadway. So hence the project was designed in coordination with a consultant. Bill led the charge as well as Leon, survey in-house, and that should be commencing once we're past our environmental windows for the Topeka Shiners.
All right, continue, Bill.
So in terms of the third bullet there, there may be some projects, some cooperation that would be done with contractors, but fundamentally, if we were to, step up bigger to the plate in terms of city-led work, we would need another second stormwater crew. The first stormwater crew that was developed under the stormwater utility has done tremendous work in helping us get our arms around the backlog that had been growing with inlet repairs and box culvert repairs. And we keep them extremely busy. It doesn't really make sense to think in terms of another person or one more truck. The four-person stormwater crew has proven to be the right vehicle for doing work. We have one, so we can do this body of work. If we were to start taking on other obligations, it would make sense to upgrade to another crew and then size the amount of work that we're willing to take on based on what could be realistically estimated for a crew of that size. So that's just the consequence of kind of going down a road of taking on more city responsibilities. And in visiting with Brian and Rob, I think, roughly something in the $450,000 to $500,000 a year is what it would take to employ a crew, keep them in equipment, and keep them in fuel and material enough to actually do the work. So that would be, the kind of budgetary numbers that you might be thinking about if we were to seriously talk about that. The last part is maybe doesn't seem as directly related, but it gets to the natural stream side of, okay, now what do we do? Right now, our benefit district program proposes a 50-50 cost share. And you all know what construction looks like, and you can just imagine the shock that homeowners feel when we do the math and come down to what 50% is. It is a tall order. None of our peer communities, if they're doing a benefit district, ask the public participants in a benefit district to shoulder that large of a share. And frankly, we don't do very many benefit districts. So one thing that staff suggests we consider is that if we want to have a program, we still want to make sure people have skin in the game. We might want to seriously talk about what is a ratio that makes for commitment and investment, but also is feasible. And 20, 30%, some other metric, there's a lot of room to play there, but the 50-50 split is probably a root level issue that we might want to talk about if we want to change anything about how we envision we're managing those expectations. So we just open that up for consideration. And with that, obviously there's a lot of other things that could be considered, and none of these have to be an all or nothing discussion, but we would be open to your comments or thoughts and recommendations.
All right, well, thank you. Immediate thoughts or comments?
I think as long as it's a benefit district and residents have to participate or owners have to participate, given the high costs, I don't know how, just like in the past, they've refused to participate. So we haven't fixed the big gully behind them that's eating at their yard. So that system doesn't work. We need to think about something else. And I don't know what that is, but these other communities have, we would have the benefit of that experience, it would seem to me. But I do think there are some areas that we have responsibility. The costs seemed just huge. So I don't know how we pay for it, I guess.
Yeah, I hate to raise stormwater fees anymore because they've been tripled probably in the last decade or so. But that's obviously the logical place for that money to come from. That way it's spread out by everybody but yeah, there's yeah, I think some kind of a 20% or 25% benefit district maybe that makes it semi-affordable for the homeowners to pay part. And I think this idea of a one-shot, okay, this problem has been going on for 30 years. We're going to try to start addressing these things, and we're going to come in and fix this, dredge out this, all the silt out of this detention basin this time, and everybody that's in the area or the benefit district or anybody else who's going to be responsible for it going forward needs to know we fixed it once, and now you guys are going to be on the hook for it next time it needs to be done. We can't kind of go in and yes, tell people, okay, well, you need to fix this thing right now, and it's $27,000. You got 3 weeks. We got to figure out some way to make it happen the time, but then going forward, we need to make sure that there's some kind of there's knowledge that this is their responsibility to maintain, because chances are most of these areas where they've got a detention pond that's been there 25, 30 years, there's hardly anybody still living there that signed the paper that knew something initially. And I don't remember anything when we bought our house 22 years ago in Sharingbrook that I'm responsible for taking care of Little Kitten Creek, my 75 yards of it back there, which I can't even see half the year because of the trees and so.
The other thing is along there, some areas are impacted and yards are eroding, but others aren't. So the ones that aren't going to be as willing to pay as those that are losing a couple of feet.
And our gripe out there has always been that the tree limbs and stuff that wash down and clog up the culvert there at Anderson started up in off of Little Kitten Avenue north up there farther near Kimball, and people we dump grass clippings in the thing, and that clogs things up too. And it's like we've talked about the ongoing educational thing, how we let people know you can't put your grass clippings in the creek. You can't dump stuff into the creek because that goes somewhere and it blocks somewhere at some time. And so we never always thought, it's like, why should we have to pay for the trees that are falling in the river upstream? So it's a conundrum, and we've got to have to figure out some way to, I hate to raise the stormwater fee to get a second crew or do stuff like this, but if it's important enough, we're going to have to do it. The question is, figuring out which ones are the highest priority, that potentially creating a problem.
Yeah, I think that would be the thing as part of your study. Where are the biggest problems? What would be the time schedule, or which ones really need to be attacked quick? I mean, we know Little Kitten, we just talked about quite a bit. It needs to have some work done, but I'm with you to, add a whole nother crew and add it onto the cost of that stormwater. I mean, we've already got affordability issues and everything else going on.
Would that include the Marlatt drainage ditch? I mean, how far are we going to interpret?
On Marlatt, Commissioner, we currently mow,
I know we maintain it, but in this plan, would the local residents have to pay for cleaning that out every 10 years like you've done in the past?
well, hopefully, we're doing a better job since we did that large project a number of years ago. And we don't have enough staff to mow it. We actually use a contractor to mow that today because I don't have staff.
The city's been doing a better job of, thank you, that's true.
So, hopefully we can control any sediment and so forth. That's where some of these regional detention ponds north of Kimball, where K-State Foundation and so on and so forth, hopefully we're stopping some of that sediment and stuff that had filled in the past. Again, that was also a stream stabilization so that the sediment load was carried by whatever volume of water that's in the low flow condition, so it didn't settle out and so forth. But at the same time, it's not moving so fast that it creates erosion. It's kind of a balancing act, and I'm not an expert in stream stabilization, but that was how that project was done a number of years ago.
I know, I just wanted to, to know the extent of the applicability of this, what we're talking about, whether, I mean, is that a tributary detention basin to be it's maintained by the city, but is it in the same category as Little Kitten and with regard to maintenance?
I mean, it all
To
depends.
be determined, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
it all depends on how aggressive
Yeah.
policy-wise you all want us to be or not be, so.
Thanks.
On the stormwater crew, they are extremely busy. In fact, we've had to back off on just a number of projects. I think Leon's got a list that he could keep them busy for the next 10 years. And it's not fair to that crew. There's certainly critical failures of inlets that have fallen that need to be addressed immediately because they're a safety hazard to residents and children and neighborhoods. We have been trying to address inlets prior to going in and doing street rehab as well. There's a concrete panel replacement project that's been out to bid, awarded, and we sent the stormwater crews to assess all the inlets and repair those before the street crews came. Again, trying to be, holistic in our approach. This crew also takes care of our levee. They make sure that we're passing our inspections. So there's a lot of burden on these 4 individuals, and the city isn't getting any smaller.
True.
See, my thought is that, clearly, we need to reduce the cost of that benefit district, because as Commissioner Morris said, we couldn't get the SECO folks to buy into it. And I also worked, it's been probably a year and a half, I think Brian may remember, it's between College Heights and Huntington Avenue. There's a little tributary in there, and there's a gas line exposed, and everybody was complaining, and I couldn't get that group to agree to a benefit district either, because they wanted the city to instantly fix it. So I agree with your assessment. What we're doing is not working. So we need to lower that. And I know we had big discussions on the Little Kitten Creek thing, who was gonna pay for that? And I think, Rob, you worked out a perfect solution on that because we didn't end up with a benefit district. But I think that was caused primarily because of the massive amount of city infrastructure that was there.
That's at risk, yeah.
But there, there's, because as the mayor said, there's big arguments on that. If you try to measure the amount of footage that somebody has against the stream, does that mean only the guys, half the people on Winsong pay, because I'm across the street? Or do you levy all the homeowners, even though I'm not up on the stream? And then the same with Sharingbrook. You can see it if you go far enough and look off the cliff.
Yep.
But if you levy everybody in Sharingbrook, it's very complicated. And when those people vote, those that aren't immediately up against it aren't gonna support it.
No.
And so I think we have to lower that. And as far as adding a crew, that just may be necessary. Because as Mark said, the homeowners are supposed to go out there with chainsaws and cut up the debris. Then what happens is they don't have any means of removing it. And so they just throw it in the stream, and then it washes down and screws up everything else. So at a minimum, we ought to be able to say, okay, you've got to clean out your stream, the code guys tell you, and then the homeowners get their chainsaws and cut it up and, drag it up to the curb, and then the city trucks can pick it up. But, we've done that a number of times on Winsong, where I've helped the neighbors cut it, and I got to use my pickup truck to haul it down there, but a lot of people don't have pickup trucks. So those kind of things, people need to understand, if they buy a house and a stream is their property, they've got to maintain it. And we may have to do a better job selling that. But I wouldn't try to take on for the city to actually maintain, some homeowner's, stream behind his house. They're gonna have to take some responsibility for that. But we can help them on moving the stuff, and then on a case-by-case basis, like the one Ron helped us with 2.5 years ago. A giant sycamore tree, fell down, and we just didn't have the capability with our little homeowner chainsaws to do anything with it. So I think we partnered the homeowner association, the city, and one of the tree services, you know, helped us get those giant logs out of there, because that thing was huge, like 4 or 5 feet. It was a monster. So that's all gonna be part of the plan, but I think we gotta go there, and people aren't gonna like adding $500,000 to the employee list, but you know, this has been one of my priorities, the stormwater, the flood water from day one, and we just need to take care of it.
Any other slides for you, this topic, Bill?
Not from me, no.
All right, any public comment on this item? Gary?
Okay, I live on Frontier Circle, which if you just go 1 block roughly east, 1.5, 2 blocks east, you end up in the creek by Village. You with me in terms of where that is? So in my particular case on Frontier Circle, I have 5 property pins, and I know that I have a very narrow, what I'll call right-of-way, that I'm obligated by state law or city ordinance to mow that, maintain that strip of land out in front of my house. How does a creek work? If I bought a house on Village, I'm gonna have 4 property pins. Is it like a right-of-way? Is a stream like a right-of-way that somebody has to maintain it? You see, well, it's kind of a legal question, I guess you could say. Who owns the stream? If it's outside of my property pins, I don't own it. I don't pay taxes on it, right?
See, the interesting thing is, it really depends on how it's platted. You know, I looked at that one on Huntington, and they didn't even have an easement, and we had to go back like 50 years, and nobody seems to understand who's responsible. Little Kitten Creek belongs to Sharingbrook because of the way they platted it. They put the property line, the stream is a Sharingbrook stream, though it doesn't benefit them at all. I think it's crazy the way they did it, but that's how it is. So I think you gotta look at each one. And it gets tougher, like Rob would say, in the older parts of town, like that one over there between Huntington and College Avenue. They just didn't make it clear that, you know, I know the gas line goes through there, and I don't believe there's an easement platted for it when we looked at it. So it gets to be a problem. And then you're right, you got 4 or 5 owners there, and some of them are rental properties, and those folks just, not my problem. I'm not gonna fix it. And so that's the dilemma you're in.
All right, any other public comment? All right, keep creeping forward with that one too, Bill. Okay, next item, C, stormwater management criteria, final adoption update.
I hope I opened the right one.
I believe that's it.
Okay. Well, we've been through 2 of these presentations, so I'll try to be quick here. My name is Karen Becker. My role here at the city is Principal Civil Engineer. And if I had to put it in a nutshell for what I do, it's basically managing internal design as well as managing reviews for external design for projects we have going on in the city. And in 2019, we started a process to update our stormwater management criteria. I want to give a little bit of kudos to my colleagues, Bill again, who is instrumental in this process as well, and also to Leon Brown. And if any of you know Leon, you'll know that he has, 40 years of experience, and he's worked with, I think, the stormwater management criteria from 1974, so he was a very good team member to have. I am going to turn this presentation back over to Bill because he was assigned as the project manager, but I'm going to walk you through some of the beginning parts of it because I was here when it started, and Bill came on board in May of 2019. To give you a little bit of a foundation as we go through. So what does the stormwater management criteria do? Well, it sets the standard for design. It sets the standard for how we design our stormwater infrastructure. And in turn, that sets the standard for how we review and also how we construct all of our stormwater infrastructure. Our agenda tonight is to give you a quick review of the project and kind of what our goals are. We're going to go through a 2020 survey that we put out to the public, give you some insight on the things that they thought were important. We're going to go through the scope of change that you could expect to see with this update to the document. We will hit some highlights on some major topics that are kind of coming out of it. We had a public comment review period. We're actually in our second comment review period, but we'll go through some of that. And then we'll hit the proposed adoption timeline and get some questions and feedback. So I want to show you this is our document. This is our 1995, we call it the SWAMP. It's the Stormwater Management Master Plan. And the Stormwater Management Criteria portion is actually in the back. It's the appendix, Appendix 1. Anyone who's done any design for the city of Manhattan on stormwater infrastructure has followed this manual since 1995. It's a good manual. It served the city very well, I think, for a very long time. However, regulations change. Some things, kind of change over time. Methodologies, ideas of design change. Weather models change, our design storms, that changes. So it was just time for an update. So also, I did want to point out that in updating it, what we really want to do is we want to reflect experience that we've gained, over this time. Leon responds to a lot of, complaints that we get about stormwater, and he'll see things, and he'll think, well, we might need to design this differently next time to avoid this issue. So there is a lot of experience there that comes into play, as well as satisfying regulatory requirements. And we also wanted to establish clear and consistent criteria. There are some inconsistencies, and I think Bill's going to go over that just a little bit later, or we're getting rid of them. So in late 2019, it was actually in December of 2019, we did contract with Burns McDonnell. They were our consultant for this endeavor. And we started the project in early 2020. And one of the first things that we did, it's not listed here, but we did an internal kind of a design charrette where Burns McDonnell came in and we got together and discussed, what's good about our design criteria, what needs to be changed, and how it affects what we do in community development with planning reviews, with building permit reviews, as well as with capital improvement reviews. We also conducted an online survey in June of 2020. We had 70 respondents. We felt like we got a really good response. And we developed our first draft and had our first public comment period from September to December of 2022. We also, during that time period, we met with several local consultants to talk about, how does this affect you? Got a lot of feedback. And through the process, we were in the process of working on the stormwater management criteria when the MDC was being updated, the Manhattan Development Code. And so there was some coordination there. More is needed, and we'll get into some of that a little bit more, I think, later. And, okay, as far as engagement with the engineering, development, and architectural community, we have presented to the Flint Hills Area Builders Association, FABA. We've talked with them, and I think we've done a fairly good job of reaching out to everyone in the community to let them know what we're doing. And we are in the second public comment period right now. We're about 98% complete, something like that. That's what we're saying. So I guess it depends on what comments we get from this time forward. But with that, I think I will give it back to Bill and let him go through some of the details.
Thank you, Karen. So as far as just some of the highlights or some of the content, before we go into what this contains, in 2020 we did a survey that we sent out to the development community. We publicized it on City Insider. We really pushed it to especially stakeholders in the public who have had some interaction. Sharing Brook was, Homes Association responded. And there were about 10 questions, but I've just highlighted 2 of them here. The question on the left is, how would you rate the overall function and condition of the stormwater system in Manhattan? Fewer than 40, closer to 35% said very good or good. Over half said poor or very poor, and about 5% said they didn't know. Now, I'm aware that the community survey recently conducted is actually giving some better marks. It hasn't rained as much as it had right before 2020, so we'd like to take all the credit, but really this is something where perceptions can change depending on the experience we're having. On the right-hand side, we asked for the things that you think we should focus on when we rewrite our standard. What would be the topics of highest priority? Handling major overflow events and floodplain management was the top, followed by detention and retention systems. The next 2 were the conveyance system of pipes, inlets, and ditches, and the accuracy of our flow estimates. Below that were another 4 items: natural streamway protections, erosion control, the green infrastructure water quality that we've been talking about, and yard drainage and subdivision. But I'll note that every one of those 8 ranked at least 50% or more of respondents saying that it was either high priority or moderate priority. So we tried to pay attention to all 8 of these in the revisions. The scope of changes, so it's actually a body of documents. So there's the stormwater criteria, which will replace that book that Karen showed you. There's also our standard details and our construction specifications, which is what tells you how to build it and what materials to use and what our preferences are there. We have another document called the Post-Construction BMP Manual, which is where all that water quality stuff resides. We're not changing that from what we adopted in 2012, except for one set of amendments just to kind of bring it a little bit up to date and tie it better to the new document. And then we've created some design submittal worksheets that are intended to allow the consulting community to put their information in a way that's easier to be comparable and tracked over time and used in review. So that's the body of documents that we would be adopting. The major topics, 30 years of experience, 30 plus years. KDOT, federal agencies, all those have continued to advance, and we needed to reflect those. Grading plans and the overflow system design are where many of the underlying issues that we see when we go out, and it's the part that kind of gets forgotten. When people think, well, the storm drains, they think the pipes, it's all about the pipes. Well, the pipes aren't carrying the entire stormwater load. It would never be cost effective to try to build every pipe big enough to carry the 100-year flow. The pipes are there to take a good chunk of it, and then in those rarer storms, we just need the landscape to do the rest. but the landscape won't do the rest if it's not thought about very carefully during design. And so that's what we emphasize with the grading plans and the overflow system. Detention basin design was in need of some updating, natural stream protection because of the Clean Water Act, but also just aesthetic preferences in development. People want to leave those wild areas, and so there's ways to do it and avoid some of these erosion problems. The flow estimate calculations, we had two different sets of equations in our document, and funny, they didn't give the same answer by a large enough margin to be a concern. And the engineering community in Manhattan knows that, and they kind of bump the one up and taper the other one down, try to meet in the middle. There's a lot of ad hoc decision making because we had some consistencies buried in the document, and we've addressed that. We're giving some guidance for submittals and studies. We want to get the right size analysis at the right time. And stormwater is one of those things that if you don't think it through before you've designed everything else, it will come back and bite you later. On the other hand, if you do think it through early, even if you change your project concept, your stormwater stuff probably doesn't change that much because it's dictated by topography and where you're at in a watershed. So those are some fundamental decisions that if we can make at least the high level earlier, it can guide the whole rest of the process. So some of the manual includes just some flow charts to better pick up what's the right time to ask these questions so that you don't regret it later. And then integrating it with the water quality and environmental regulations. There's a lot we touched. Just to highlight, I kind of jumped ahead here and explained why grading was such an important feature in the work we did. But yet we don't want to be looking at somebody's backyard deck and trying to micromanage everything about grading. So there's a bit of a balance. There's a balance between what the original civil engineer does and what the heavy contractor does, what the home builder does. We've divided this up into better information about the overall grading plan for the subdivision, because right now most of our grading plans show the street, but then it gets a little fuzzy beyond that. And you don't always have enough information to really tell you what the design intent was. And then when you look at it, there's anywhere from 20 to 35% of the lots that are on something important. They back up to the creek, a big pipe runs between the lots. Those are the ones that need some special attention paid. You don't necessarily need to micromanage all of the lot construction, but there's some very key lot level information that we would be asking for on just a select number of lots. And the contractor who's building it doesn't have to guess, because the grading plan that the original engineer submitted is going to tell us what was expected for that lot, so that it transfers that responsibility and you're not out in the field, everyone scratching their head trying to figure out what was expected. In terms of natural streams, people like to have a wooded buffer area to back up to. It's a very popular amenity. And actually, natural streams can save a lot of construction cost if you're not burying them in a big pipe, but they need room. If a natural stream is given a buffer zone, it can do its erosion, it can cause its little drama, and it doesn't have to affect somebody's home. This is what most cities of our peers, Kansas City metro area especially, have moved to in the last 20 years, is setting guidance for natural stream buffers. We are not mandating. The guidance is not saying you must preserve a natural stream or you must not. It's saying if you come and say, I want to preserve a natural stream, what would be the technical criteria that would make that successful? And this fills in a lot of details that were missing before. And a lot of this is pretty boring engineering. There's just an awful lot of work we've done to update our technical standards and our specifications to address things that we know we want to have done, or things that we've kind of gotten used to commenting on anyway, is just bring all that up to date. One particular area is addressing the outfall of culverts and stormwater pipes. That's where you tend to get a lot of very focused damage and erosion. And there are techniques that can help with that, but a lot of design in the past has been fairly cursory as far as how much rock you put and how you arrange it so you can break that energy. There's good guidance out there, and we're just reflecting that in our new manuals. In terms of the public comment, the general theme that we heard during the first round, and which I anticipate we will hear in the second round, is, address the issues but keep it streamlined. We've really tried to strike that balance. provide some accommodations for projects in progress, so we understand that, there are projects that are in the, the 6th phase of a 7-phase project, and so some things that were already built may constrain. There's provisions in there for the city engineer to take that into account, though we do still want to have what is the standard asking be clear, so that if we need a departure, we can make a departure in a reasonable way. The grading design review, actually we had engineers tell us, yeah, I think that's a good thing, but try to stay targeted. Don't get too overboard in what you're asking, so that's a balance. There's a lot of agreement that better communications can avoid problems. We've been trying to improve that. We do much more pre-application meetings now and in a more formal way, so that we can be talking about projects before they get so far down that the comments are going to be a problem. Try to be consistent with peer communities, and we've really looked at our peer communities in a lot of these. The engineers that work here are working in other places. They don't like it if the standard looks completely different. We believe the engineering community is ready for the new manual. I think we're ready to learn. We know there'll be some things that continue to need to be tweaked, and be cautious, sensitive on cost and schedule. And there has been, as indicated, some support for the fee and lieu programs. The fee and lieu at detention in particular is proving useful in very select cases. Adoption timeline. We're in our second public comment period. That closes September 7th. We'll see what the comments are we get. Hopefully we are as close to the end as we hope we are. And if so, would be in position for the Director of Public Works and the City Engineer to move forward on the adoption framework and put those into place as our new technical standards. And with that, again, we would stand for questions.
Anybody understand enough of that to ask a question about it?
We're all stormwater wizards up here. I think it's important that we are a community at the convergence of rivers, and we have to look after our residents with regard to stormwater and flooding. This is not a flooding, right, Bill, so much as the stormwater management.
So this isn't like the floodplain, like
Yeah.
FEMA floodplain level. This is more about the close-in system that pipes, inlets, streams. Yes, it's the more local system.
We had a stormwater, a flooding task group several years ago after Wildcat Creek erupted. And of course I came from the Blue River side and was there during the flood of '93. The issues we came up to, issues we had tended to be more about the stormwater arriving in Manhattan from the west on Wildcat Creek and from Tuttle Creek on the Blue. And the fact that there's no detention prevention on Fort Riley for Wildcat Creek. So so it's rolling pretty fast by the time it gets to the city of Manhattan. So I don't know, how are you proposing to deal with that?
So these standards would assist in making sure we're not making those problems worse. However, the challenge of Wildcat Creek is, as you said, it's a floodplain management question. This is not a panacea either. There is still a need to continue to manage properties. I do think that the combination of this document and our floodplain regulations would certainly influence new developments. If something were to come in and be proposed along Wildcat Creek, would have much more setback, much better elevation, much better controls. But for the part that had already developed, again, that's this dilemma of managing existing infrastructure.
I would just want to be reassured that by adopting this, we would not be allowing developments in areas that we shouldn't. Like areas that are more prone to flooding, or like I'm thinking of the area east of Casement Road, and north of the radio station. That's farm ground, but flooded in 93. So if it's, if it has flooded in the past, we would not be allowing new development there, would be my rule of thumb.
I'd say, Commissioner, I'd say that this design manual is both for public projects, like, like we're looking at Sunset and so forth, as well as the private development. We're not proposing any changes to the floodplain regulations and any of those rules that you all have adopted.
I'm just
So,
thinking of the
we-
development we allow.
Yep.
And we've allowed some risky areas in the past, so, and now we're buying them out. But,
And that's more the FEMA
I know.
floodplain management. Whereas this, we're trying to get at just being consistent in the standards, the tables, the calculations for coming up with the amount of flow for certain size events, the conveyance, the diameter of pipes, as Bill and Leon will attest to, and even Karen, thinking when we do have new developments, how are we routing the water? Where is the not just the size of the pipes, but also the overland flow? Even though it's not a mapped FEMA event, you get 7 inches in a 24-hour period, it's problematic. So where is that overflow going to be? That pipe isn't going to carry all that water. Subdivisions, developers, none of us can afford that 100-year. We had a commissioner once say, why don't we design to the 1,000-year? That is not feasible economically. You cannot afford the 1,000-year events. So that's what we're trying to get at with this and so forth. And the same thing with the standard detailed drawings, a whole adoption of all these things that we keep commenting over and over again on various developments and so forth. I hope I answered your question a little bit.
It's mostly all for new development, and/or if we're tearing up Aggieville streets and putting in new stormwater, we'll be using some of these new guidelines.
we're redirecting water in ways we haven't in the past also. So I would just say, just ethically, I don't want to be, I don't want my vote to ever be responsible for some property owner flooding. So if this is best and best practices, then I would support it.
John?
Thinking of new development, is there anything in the new guidelines you're coming up with that would increase costs significantly for a new development?
So that's been a balance. We may hear in the comment period thoughts about where we're at on that cost curve. There are some things that were problematic. We see them as problematic in maintenance that are recommended to be changed. That probably would increase some costs. On the other hand, there's a lot of compensating factors with natural stream protection guidelines and other things. It's very hard, it's very case by case as to exactly what choices people would be make, but our intent here was not so much to develop more expensively, it was to develop smarter, to make sure that we make good decisions in design that can head off problems down the road. And the key example is this grading. If grading is thought about, it doesn't actually add to the cost of the pipes or anything. It has to do with how overflow swales are conserved, how the street grade was laid out. A lot of those would have cost the same to do badly as they do to do well, or the increment is very minor. So we do not believe that it's a substantial increase. There could well be a delta between what's done today, but it's been designed to be things that will help the life cycle, to avoid future city maintenance burdens in a reasonable way.
Okay, I think anything you mentioned it earlier, the important part is when he gets done vetting that out and getting the comments back, so there isn't any surprises after it goes in when someone talks about an increased cost factor.
That's what the comment period hopefully will reveal is if there's any lingering concerns, we would like to address them. You know, standards are standards, so they do impose some level of expectation, but we're trying to address the issues that we've actually seen as real problems.
Get that to work. I think it looked good. I don't see a problem with it at all, and I think the in lieu of thing, I think will work, because my understanding of that is that instead of doing those detention things on site, you can take that money and use it to upgrade a pipe and something like that, and it does a much better job for the, you know, for the whole entire system. And as far as changing the standards on those, you know, I think the picture you had there was one of the storm drains, you know, off of a street. That makes sense to me, because I've seen the crews repair a couple of those, and that was probably because the original design, when they were put in, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, was not adequate to make it last long-term, so I think all that's good.
All right, you got anything else before I throw it open to see if Gary has a question? All right.
No.
Okay, open up for public comment. Jared, do you want to, why are you guys here? Okay.
Soak it in.
All right. This is nothing that Gary cares about. Okay, we'll close public comment. Continue moving forward. Okay. Next item, proposed 2024 water, wastewater, stormwater, utility budgets, and overall budget feedback. Who's in charge of that? Randy? All right.
Okay, thank you. All right. Evening, Mayor and Commissioners. So to start, we'll look at a slide that I show about every year, talk about some of the reasons behind or some of our goals as far as fund balances, and eventually we'll talk about rate increases. Obviously, number one goal for us is to maintain adequate and recommended cash reserves. Just as a reminder, recommended levels include 3 months of operational expenses, as well as 1 year of debt services. Over the past few years, we've talked a lot about some of our internal goals to try to have about $9 to $10 million in cash reserves for each one of these funds. Talked a lot about 2025 as a target year to achieve those cash balances. Some of the information I provided you in the memo and in this presentation will kind of show you we've made a lot of strides in that, and we're looking pretty good in both of these funds. Obviously, second goal is to ensure that we got adequate budget funding for operations and maintenance, activities, capital improvement program projects, and maintenance projects. And obviously, we have a lot of completed projects that we have to retire debt on. Also, we have a desire to meet the needs of community growth and then state and federal requirements, which we have a few of those to talk about as well. So to start on the wastewater side, a look back at 2023 to date, and a look back at last year when we presented these items to you. So when we presented the wastewater fund update in August of last year, we were projecting a year-end balance of $5.3 million. Through some additional revenues that were higher than anticipated, and not just sales, but other revenues such as farm incomes, connection fees, et cetera, as well as almost $1 million in budget savings, mostly through the sewer maintenance division. Our actual beginning fund balance for 2023 was $7.5 million. So we started the year off in really good shape. Looking at year-to-date sales and consumption, we typically start by looking at the winter quarter average. Technically, it's up slightly, but I would say that's marginal. It's pretty much flat. We look at that in two different ways. We look at the residential customers, and then we look at the residential customers with K-State. When you factor in K-State, we're up slightly. If you take K-State out, we're actually a little bit down. But all in all, I'm going to say we're relatively flat, which is good because for going back several years ago, we've been looking at declining winter quarter averages. So it seems to have stabilized some. Year-to-date revenues, we are projecting that we're about 3.5% up this year from the same period last year. So that would be attributed to the 3% rate increases we did for 2023.
Randy, are you going to get to the point, if you're at 7.5 million, is that about your target, or do you have another slide at the end that shows those?
So, as far as expenditures, looks like everything, all divisions are under budget. So barring any unforeseen expenses throughout the rest of the year, the last 4 months of the year, we're looking pretty good. As far as 2024 budget and new expenditures, we do have one new position request. That is administrative support position that would be split 50-50 with the water and wastewater fund. The purpose of this is to assist our admin staff and some of our superintendents with new financial and accounts payable responsibilities that we have, and just general admin support to try to relieve some of that burden off our existing staff. So overall, personnel increases for 2024, salary and benefits is a $168,000 increase over 2023. Also have $225,000 in new IT charges. A lot of that is because the new IT fund has taken over some responsibilities for like annual maintenance agreements and many of our software agreements that we typically paid for directly out of the fund. And then a good bit of news is we've lowered that general fund transfer that we do on an annual basis by $400,000. You'll see that is the same case in the water fund as well. That primarily covers overhead costs for fleet maintenance, IT. So those are charges that we traditionally would have paid through the general fund transfer, and now they're direct costs to the funds. As far as recommended rate increases, the forecast the past few years we've had 3% increases. We're not recommending to deviate from that for 2024. As far as fund balance projections, right now we're looking at a potential year-end fund balance of $7.7 million, and 2030 we're looking at 11.1. So I always like to show these graphically. I see the data better in this form. So this is a recap of what we showed you at our 2022 update. At that time, fund was trending upwards and looking to be in a good place. We were still well below the recommended fund balance level. Fast forward to this year, you can see that some of those items that I talked about earlier has put us in a drastically better position. Not only for, like I said, the 2023 budget, but 2024 budget, and out years we're now at or a little bit above recommended levels. So in terms of the recommended fund balance, and also with our kind of desired goal of being within $9 to $10 million by 2025. So we're looking really good on the wastewater side. I'm going to go back to you, Mayor, and you had that question. Does that show you what you wanted to see?
Bingo, thanks.
Okay. So the really good part is like I said, we're one good year has set us up for success in the future. So one of the things we've done with both the water and wastewater funds is our out years. We've really taken a hard look at forecasts for things like personnel and trying to factor in inflation, commodities and contractual services, as well as increasing capital costs. But we've increased some of our projections, like for personnel. Traditionally, we'd be 3 to 5% projecting increases on an annual basis. We bumped that up to 7%, just to account for what we see as inflation and cost increases in the out years.
So somebody's going to ask me the question, why do we need that much money in the fund balance?
Well, the answer to me is look at all the infrastructure that we own and maintain. It only takes one thing to go bad, go wrong, and that money will be gone in a heartbeat. So trying to make sure we got an adequate pad in there for that when that happens. Like I said, the recommendation is 3 months of operations and 1 year of
Debt service.
debt service. So the assumption is something catastrophic happens, we lose our wastewater plant. We may not be able to have the ability to collect those revenues, so we need to have a way to continue to pay for those services, or for those debt service.
Okay,
Commissioners, in addition, I would just highlight growth opportunities, pressure that we're receiving on all fronts of this community to expand and be able to expand. Those opportunities are usually met with us investing early and then potential revenue streams down the road. Being in a better financial position leaves us in a better position, not only from the fund, but from the city to issue debt and to take those initiatives to a point where we're providing infrastructure so that development can occur. It's not on the backside. You know, it's not like we wait for the development and then we're there. We're in first. So we're better off being in a financial position to go in first and augment that growth opportunity.
Okay, but this amount is in addition to the reserve we've talked about for the normal city budget, right?
It is, but each utility is looked at by our rating agencies in terms of the health of it moving forward. If you're unable to, and you haven't been, you have a really good track record, and we get that feedback from the rating agencies. The willingness to raise rates in the utilities is noticed, as is the balances in those funds. They slipped, and you've seen that. When they were in the red in 20 and 21, those were not years we were receiving good feedback from our rating agencies. They watch those funds as well. But we're back in a better position. We also have a lot of demands on our services. And I've asked Randy, and I think I've seen the map internally, if you look at everywhere we're providing water and sewer, it is well beyond the city limits of Manhattan. That area we are serving is massive. And Randy deals with water customers every day, inside and outside this community, relying on that service. It's a utility, it's an enterprise, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about natural gas, electricity, but they position themselves to be able to react. And they carry a lot of weight at the state level to get their rate charges where they need to operate successfully. We're trying to do the same.
Okay, appreciate that. That way I won't be saying something different than the staff when I get that question asked. Thanks.
Well, and we'll talk about rates, but one of the reasons we're so proactive about making sure we do incremental rate increases every year, I don't have a chart to show you this, but if we did 0% rate increases, and I've shown this to Ron and Jason, that fund balance drops immediately. I mean, so we're not looking at rates for next year. We're looking at rates for 5 years down the road, because it's a compounding interest kind of thing. It has a drastic impact on the out years, what we do this year and next year. So next item is really to talk about what those potential customer impacts will be. So these are the 7 primary categories we look at, but as always, I like to focus on that residential average customer that consumes about 7 units, because that makes up the majority of our customer base. And so just zooming in on that so you can see it. This row right here, so with the 3% rate increase, the average customer's bill will increase approximately $1.42 a month, and it would have an impact of $17.03 to their annual bill. And so, again, focus on that particular category because it is our primary customer base and where we generate most of our revenue from. I always like to show the municipal comparison with our peer cities. So the red obviously indicates the city of Manhattan with the proposed 3% rate increase for 2024. All the rest of the peer cities are based on their 2023 rates. Again, this is just a a tool to look at. This doesn't have any bearing on our decisions of what we do for rate increases, but just to give you a little bit of background, in my research, there were 13 of our peer cities that raised rates in 2023, and that was by an average of 11%. So we're still middle of the pack, a little bit higher. Our average monthly bill would be a little bit higher than the average, which you see over here on the right. And again, this is just something to make sure we're in line with our peer cities. Always try to provide just a list of some of the projects that we're looking at. I don't really have a lot of specifics to say about these projects unless there's something you have questions about. I will just note that, this is a good example of why we're very proactive with making sure our rates are where they need to be and dealing with inflation. That top project is one that we're working on currently at the wastewater plant to upgrade and expand our solids treatment systems. We're hopefully getting ready to select a CMAR for that project here in the next month. The original budget for that was $12 million. We've taken out some pretty large scope items, and our current estimates on that project are $16 million now. So the cost of doing these large projects are going up. You'll see it in the water side, you'll see it in the stormwater side. It's just something we have to deal with. So,
in keeping with what Jason talked about expanding our needs as the community grows, how much expansion do you have to plan for?
well,
Like next year and the year after?
Generally, if you look at what the state tells us we need to do as far as planning, when you've achieved 50% of your capacity for your average day is when you need to look at expanding. This is a solids treatment upgrade. Capacity, when you talk about solids treatment, is a little different than the liquid side, which is the most recent upgrade that was completed in 2012, which was a $25 million upgrade. That increased our plant capacity quite a bit,
So
up
what
to about 11.
what percentage are we?
So our plant capacity is about 11 million gallons.
Is that what percent?
And then we typically, a base is about 5 million gallons.
Okay.
Now, the 11 million gallons it's a little bit misleading. I mean, we can put a peak flow through that facility that's substantially higher. That facility recirculates wastewater through it, so you can do a much higher peak. But as far as a daily capacity, it's 11 million gallons. Like I said, a base flow in the city of Manhattan is between 4 and 5 million gallons a day.
So what percent, you said that when you get to 50%, you have to start planning for the future.
Ideally, you would start planning for that, but.
Are we at 50%?
Not quite.
Not quite.
11 million, 5 million, is
yeah.
that?
45%.
Okay.
I would say we've been at 5 million gallons though for quite some time. Even though the city's growing, reductions in I&I, more efficient, fixtures, appliances has reduced that. Growth in a wastewater treatment facility is relatively slow, in my experience.
Okay.
I would be more worried about capacity at like biosolids farm and our ability to have enough land to dispose of those biosolids.
But we've looked after that, right? I mean,
Yes.
we're good for years to come, I think.
We're good for now, but
Yeah.
there's.
Yeah, on the $12 to $16 million upgrade, is some of that due to KDHE changing the rules again, tightening down the screws, or is it more?
Not necessarily. I mean, this is a project that is, like I said, we upgraded the liquid side in 2012. The solid side did not get an upgrade. This is a little bit more about more efficient processes, increasing redundancies where we don't have redundancies. None of this is really driven by state or federal requirements.
Okay, good.
Not like the last one was.
Yeah.
So the last one was biological nutrient removal. It was definitely directly related to EPA and KDHE requirements.
There are some in the works, though.
Oh, yeah. I got a slide about that. So.
We're not
Significant. in the works,
Yeah.
but they're still being discussed.
We also, and Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, the last design meeting for the biosolid side, we talked a lot about when Randy talked about resiliency, eliminating single points of failures within our system and trying to create options so that we don't have single points of failure and then go out of compliance, so.
Yeah, I wanted to comment, I see the issue of, having all these reserves to take care of disasters and growth inside the city. But I wonder sometimes why we're putting so much effort into connecting to everybody outside the city. It's almost like, like Pod County doesn't care if they have a water system because they just rely on, they rely on Manhattan. And is that driving up our costs? Because if you're looking at capacity, if you just look at the city's capacity, we're great, just take care of the city, but you add the rural water districts and everything else we're doing, is that indirectly driving up costs for the Manhattan citizens?
I would say more than anything, it may be consuming some of our future capacity. They pay extra to be our customer, so that's the good side of things. They're contributing more based on the amount of water that we treat for them. So they're paying for it.
And I think the other upside to that is that when we do have to expand, we have a much larger customer base to fund that expansion because they'll continue to pay more.
Okay. Yeah, I know their rates are what, 1.5 and twice, depending on whether it's sewer or water.
Yeah, generally outside the city is a one rate, 50% surcharge. Wholesale agreements are generally 25%, I think. So
The rural water districts are less than or less of a markup than individual.
yeah, I mean,
Okay, thanks.
we wholesale them to them.
Yeah.
Most cities give those customers a discount.
Wow, that's crazy.
So
Okay.
whoever thought of that idea was pretty wise. So.
And those 1.5 or 1 1/4 also apply to connection fees. So it isn't just the usage, it's the buying more of the system as well, as they have rural subdivisions that come in.
All right, keep going.
Correct. Well, that's really all I have on the wastewater side. Until later, we'll talk about some of the environmental issues, but we'll move on to water. Last year when we presented, we were looking at a year-end balance of $7.2 million. Similar to wastewater fund, we did have a good year revenue-wise, not just sales, but right-of-way permit programs brought in some good, higher than anticipated revenue. Leases to cell companies on our towers, we had a little bit higher revenue than we anticipated because one of our tenants left and they had to pay us a year's worth of rents. And then about $400,000 in budget savings. So the result of that being the 2023 actual beginning fund balance was $9.1 million.
Your revenue should be doing really good right now, shouldn't it?
So yeah, sales and consumption year to date. So this is actually probably through July. We were 10% up revenues, 6% consumption from the same period last year. Yes, as you mentioned, we are selling a lot of water right now. The Colbert Hills, everybody else, they are buying a lot of water from us. So I anticipate that will go up a little higher in the next couple weeks. Expenditures, very similar story to the wastewater fund. All divisions are under budget. As far as some of the things we keep a really close eye on, water treatment plant chemicals, those have increased due to inflation, but fortunately we took account for that in the budget last year. It's nowhere near the inflation we experienced in 2022. Those commodity prices were skyrocketing at that time. So, but like I said, barring any unforeseen circumstances, the last 4 months of the year we're good budget-wise. As far as 2024 budget, 4 new positions requested. Aforementioned administrative support position that cost share with the wastewater fund. And then 3 new maintenance staff within the Water Distribution Division. And this would be a KDHE initiative, not a mandatory item, but this would be for a crew to assist with valve exercising, valve maintenance and inspection. Past probably 5 or 6 years, every time we get an inspection from KDHE, they've promoted us to have a more proactive valve maintenance.
Their initiative, but are they going to pay for it?
I wish. This is something that it needs to get done. We've had a reactive maintenance program in the past. We have almost 5,000 valves in the system. We usually only touch them when we need to isolate the system for maintenance or for a main break. We do a good job of logging every time we touch a valve and maintain it. But for the most part, we're a reactive maintenance when it comes to valve exercising. This would put us in a more proactive position to exercise those valves, maintain them. The goal would be to do it once every 2 to 3 years. But these are critical when it comes to trying to isolate the zone to make that area as small as possible so we impact fewer customers. It's also to help reduce the risk of contamination. The smaller of a zone we can have to depressurize, the better, less likely to have to do a boil water advisory. We've been fortunate enough, we haven't had to do one of those for a while. But this includes, CIP equipment purchases as well. So it's something we were hopeful we could do in-house with staff that we already have. Unfortunately, we just haven't been able to accomplish that. We did study this in 2021 with our water master plan. Our consultant helped us look at, startup costs, personnel needs, equipment needs. Again, we were hoping that we could do this with staff that we have, but it just hasn't worked out. So we're looking to add 3 staff members for that. In total, 2024 impacts from personnel increases is $500,000. Again, that's salaries and benefits. IT charges, $300,000 higher than 2023. Same reasons we talked about on the wastewater fund. Water plant chemicals and energy, anticipating almost $200,000 in increases, and then that same general fund transfer reduction.
I was going to comment, I don't see a real problem with, adding those valve maintenance people, just simply because, I don't know, it's about 6 months ago, I talked with Rob about that, because I just happened to notice it looked like a pipe sticking out of the road, because the cap had come off of it, and cars were driving over it, and then I got to look, and there's a bunch of them like that over by the county commission building, the parking lot there, they're sitting there, so it's clear nobody's been looking at them, and if they get busted up somehow, because a lot of them are in the streets, then what happens when you have a water main break? You got disaster on your hands.
Well, you got to go 2 blocks down. Your isolation area doubles or triples in size. And we do a good job about identifying ones that don't work, and we put them in an annual replacement program. We only budget about $100,000 a year for that type of work, for valves and new fire hydrants. These things some of them date back to 1910 to 1920s. Some of them work great, some of them won't budge. The worst thing that can happen is you try to work one and it breaks while you're doing it, because then you enter into emergency repairs, and that's what we're trying to avoid. It's just decreasing the likelihood of those failures. We have staff that utility funds that work in the street department that are utility pavement repair staff. We would hope that we were able to use those staff for this project or for this program. But unfortunately, they're busy doing the actual job of doing street repairs. They don't have enough spare time to come over and assist us with valve exercising and valve maintenance. And to take them away from that would require the general fund to have to incur the cost of adding another street crew. So thus the request for 3 new staff.
What about maintaining the water meters? Is that all usual and normal, and there are no blips in the road there?
we deal with aging meters, 20 years as an expected life cycle for those. We have a large amount of meters that are coming up to or past that life expectancy. We've developed some capital projects in the past. We're in the middle of one right now to reduce or to replace a large amount of those. It really depends on, we have 3 staff members, we used to have 4. It really just depends on how much those folks can get to. They're busy certain times of the month with shut-offs and turn-ons. But in general, that program is improving, and it's a constant cycle of replacing those meters when they're getting to be 20 years old. We do save a lot of money now because it's all automated.
Okay, yeah,
but
right.
but even that system has points of failure, and
Sure, that's what I wondered. Okay, thanks.
Just one thing to add on the water valve exercise. It's not just the water valves in the road, it's also the air release valves that we have in our system. We also have pressure reducing valves as well, making sure we get more regular maintenance so that the system just has more consistent pressure. It's those fluctuations in the pressure in the water mains that can create challenges and unfortunately breaks. So that's the other tasks that those 3 individuals will be doing as well.
I know some communities have had a lot of water breaks we didn't have anywhere near the number that Topeka and other communities have had.
I mean, we have more than we'd like. There's a couple tracking items that we do on an annual basis as far as benchmarking main breaks per 100 miles of infrastructure. Generally, we're higher than industry standards, but definitely lower than other cities. This time of year when demands are highest is when we're experiencing a lot of those, and also in the winter when it's coldest and ground shifting. So back to this though, so rate increases for 2024. Last year we did a 4% increase. That was in lieu of something higher. And what we did was we programmed a 4% increase for 2023. And in the forecast, we did 4% for 24 and 25, and then we reduced the forecast to where it was 3% increases after 2025. And I'll move to some of these charts, and I'll explain you kind of why we're looking at potentially a higher rate increase than 4%. So again, here's the fund balance chart that it was presented to you last August and September. Water fund was and is still in good shape. We were close to recommended levels all throughout the forecast of 2030. 2024, current fund balance, again, just like on the wastewater side, you can see that the good year we had in 2022 has helped us drastically as far as meeting our fund balance goals now and in the next couple of years. You can see that we're well above recommended levels, meeting our desired goals of that $9 to $10 million in cash reserves. And because of some of the things we talked about with dealing with inflation and adjusting the forecast for higher personnel costs and commodities costs in the future, you can see that in the out years we do drop back below the recommended level. A lot of capital improvement projects and debt service kicking in after 2025. So, like we talked about, rate increases aren't just for next year; they're for out years, 5 years. We're looking 5 years down the road as far as what our rate increases are going to help us with. So, what if scenarios? We looked at what the rates need to be in order to correct this to get it where we want to be. So, I looked at a couple options, and just for sake of showing you, what it would take in order to make sure that that projected fund balance meets recommended levels through the out years, came across a 6% rate increase for 2024. This assumes then we would drop back down to 4% and 3% rate increases the rest of the years. So really this is just for purposes of showing you what it would take to meet those other goals. And of course, customer impacts for both of those scenarios, again, focusing on residential average customer. If we did a 4% increase, that would be $1.47 more a month. Annually, it would be an extra $17.64 in the average monthly water bill. 6% rate increase would result in an additional $2.21 per month and an additional $26.46 annually. Again, same information for our peer city comparison. We've had a few cities that leapfrogged us last year. Where both of those options that you see still puts us well below the midpoint of our peer cities, well below the average. Again, doing the research, found that I believe 13% of those peer cities raised their rates, and that was by an average of 13%. Again, just for informational purposes, nothing that we would really use to determine what our rate increases should be. Again, nice long list of very expensive CIP projects that if there's any of these you have particular questions about. The one that I would draw your attention to is something that we're going to talk about here in a second, and that's unplanned projects, EPA and KDHE initiatives. This is like lead and copper rule updates. We have to do a water service inventory right now, and those are unexpected costs that could be up to $750,000 to hire a consultant to help us complete a survey of our lead service lines, which that's kind of a misnomer. We don't have any lead service lines, but we do have galvanized service lines, which do have a small amount of lead pipe near the main. This is a hot button topic. A lot of new EPA regulations based off of Flint, Michigan, and the disaster they had there. The big difference is Flint has corrosive water. We don't. But regardless, this is a requirement that's being put on every municipality, and so something that we'll be dealing with this year. And that is one of the smaller projects we have on here, just listed as an example of some of the things we have to do in the next few years.
That's not the fix, that's just to do the inventory of them?
That's just the inventory. The majority of that cost is hiring a contractor to dig up a sample size to lay eyes on these service lines. What we'll end up doing is, because there's not very good records, we know generally there's a year where we ceased using galvanized and started using copper. But because there's not clear and defined records, we'll probably be working with a consultant to do predictive modeling to give us a computer-generated idea of where those galvanized service lines are. We have a pretty good idea, but if we don't have a record that says they're galvanized, we have to assume they're unknown. And if you have too many unknowns in your system, it's bad in terms of what we could have to do in the future as far as additional sampling for lead and copper service line replacement. So we will use technology to help give us a model of what those services likely are. And then we have to go do potholing, hydro excavation to verify those results. So that's where majority of those costs are going to come from.
Seems like we always have this water tower looming, that's $5 million. It's how, in the 6th year, when do you actually expect it? What year?
So that particular one is, I would say there's higher priorities to get water to that zone,
Okay.
Transmission capacity, than there is to have more storage.
Getting the water there is.
Yes,
Okay.
and that would be what this crosstown transmission main is. In the past, that was the northwest transmission main. We had looked at going north of town along Marlatte. Through various studies, we decided and determined that it would be much more beneficial to our entire system to look at a route through town. And so we've got booster pump station upgrades that are ongoing, including the Northwest Booster Pump Station. And that water tower, while I think it's important that we look at having additional storage there, there's probably places in town where those dollars would be better spent as far as needing storage, but
At this point, anywhere, we don't need the storage.
yeah.
Okay,
If we don't put it in the northwest zone, we'll end up putting more storage somewhere
Yeah.
in the system.
okay. You, down under unplanned,
Yes.
are you gonna cover that or say any more?
We can talk about any ones that you want
Well, I
to.
just wanted to talk about the North TCB
Yes.
drainage channel stormwater improvements.
Yeah, well, Brian's going to talk about that as
Good.
well, but
Okay.
the drainage channel is one project. The lime sludge lagoon and the water relocations are associated with that project. The water relocation specifically, we have several large raw water mains and a finished water main that have to be lowered because of that drainage channel project. The lime sludge lagoon improvements are a combination of having to do those stormwater channel improvements, but it's also a major, it's an environmental issue that KDHE is putting on us to improve our lime sludge lagoons.
Well, we just spent $4 million on that, didn't we?
Well, this is
This is that one.
that's this project.
Okay.
It's been put off and put off. We have to wait until the levee project gets done. There's a certain sequence of events: levee project,
Okay.
utility relocations, channel, lime sludge lagoons.
Okay, this is the same one we've been talking
Same
about for
one,
a couple of
yeah.
years. Okay.
So,
What is water relocations?
water, so the mains, we have to lower them.
Lower the mains.
So the drainage channel has to get lowered, which means we have to lower our water mains. And these are two of our two only raw water transmission mains from the well field to the water plant. And then a 16-inch water main that serves.
And they're on Tuttle Creek, north
So
Tuttle.
north of Limey Point, IHOP,
Uh-huh.
the large stormwater detention
Okay.
basins that are
All
there.
right.
So
And the Aggieville area,
Aggieville is a,
we're gonna be
we're
doing.
constantly
Yeah.
upsizing the water lines as we do Aggieville. We think that a lot of those will be funded through the TIF, at least supported through the TIF dollars. So that's why it's
Because,
kind of a to be
There are a lot of
determined.
old things, right, in
Oh, yeah.
Aggieville?
And undersized.
Undersized and,
So when we do Morrow, for example,
exactly.
all right, we're gonna have to,
Laramie's the same way, Commissioner.
okay.
Hey, you've heard Chief French and Deputy Ryan Olms both talk about concerns of Aggieville and volume as well as pressure.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Other changes for charges and fees, system development charges, those are our connection fees. We always try to keep them the same on both the water and wastewater side. We would do a 3% increase for those. Meter installation charges, that information that you have there is probably not accurate. So we upgraded, or we increased our meter installation charges last year to $1,900 for base installation. We also included language in the ordinance that allowed us to adjust that for inflation. I did recently request and received information from our staff that due to inflation, our costs are now $2,200 for that base installation. So we will probably look at increasing those sometime this fall. And then Kansas One Call fees.
So each time, like a resident installs a meter,
New
it's
service.
$2,200?
New service, that's just for our infrastructure costs, so the meter, the pipe, fittings, and our time and labor and equipment.
So is it going up? What has it been? And
Yeah, the cost of the materials, it's
been
brass,
2,000?
brass and copper, and so that's,
It's been one cost and now it's going to 2,200?
it's $1,900 currently.
1,900, okay. Wow. Everything is up a bunch, isn't it?
Especially if it's made out of brass or copper.
Yeah.
I'll go back. Kansas One Call fees, we adjusted those last year. No reason to look at those again. We're sitting okay with those. As far as environmental issues, we've talked about a couple of these already: valve exercising, lead and copper rule revisions. Right now, the focus is the inventory. We've got a deadline next fall to accomplish that. Unfortunately, the next thing after that is we'll probably have to come up with a plan to replace those. So fortunately, at least with lead and copper, a lot of the federal funds through BIL have been earmarked for lead and copper. So as long as we meet requirements and those funds are still available, we should have funds to help us with replacing those. So that is one good thing. And then PFOS and PFOS, I know Commissioner Morse, you've inquired about this before.
Yeah.
This is the great unknown for us. This is a forever chemical that is just high on the EPA's radar right now. The current focus is on wastewater. They have established new rules and set limits in wastewater and drinking water, or proposed limits. We're still learning about them. Our concern is going to be on the wastewater side. That we know it's in everything. It's in the clothes you wear. It's in carpet. It's in food containers, whatever. It's there. The assumption is that it's going to be in the wastewater effluent and it's going to be in the biosolids. The biggest impact on us right now is going to be it could impact how we dispose of biosolids in the future. There's one state, Maine, I believe, has banned application of biosolids on ag fields. It's kind of put a pause on us expanding our farm anymore, at least in the next few years until we learn more about what these regs are going to look like. It's not going to be cheap, and they are very, very stringent, and it's got a lot of communities concerned. It's going to happen on the water side. Fortunately for us, we're groundwater source. If we were surface water, we might have some more concerns, but we will be doing some federal testing in 2024 to assess for PFOS and PFOS in our source water.
Good.
So not looking forward to it, but it's coming. So that's all I got for you.
Okay, any other questions for Randy? Any public comment, Gary?
When we go to gallons instead of
He has to go to the microphone.
It's not a serious question. Yeah.
Not a serious question.
All right. Thank you. If that's, when you got something?
Well, you had two things there, raised at 4% or 6%, and I guess we didn't comment on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I would look for some guidance. If I were to make a recommendation, I would recommend the 6%, just because I'm always looking at that next 5 years. Obviously, we're in a good position now. Talk about some of the things that Jason talked about. We're trying to position ourselves to be in very good position in the future when it comes to growth. And me as a administrator of this fund, I'm always looking to make sure that we're in a good position. We are in a good position, but we always be better. So.
But it'd just be for 1 year at 6 and then back to 4 and then back to 3. And
That's the way we would show it in the forecast, yeah.
See, I would sort of come down on 4% this year, just because of the way the assessments came out. And just looking at big picture, I get it. If we're just doing the water fund, I'd buy into it. But you stand back and look at all the mill levies and the assessments, and people are gonna get higher bills, and they're already upset about that. So if we could, not make this as bad, I think it's the right time not to this year.
I agree with that. I mean, the 4%, we're probably going to see even bigger surplus as we go through this heat wave. I see your chart, and I don't see a huge risk in that.
Yes, so traditionally, we've waited until November to come back with ordinances. Until last year, we actually came back relatively quickly, and I think we did that in September. So we can, see what things look like.
Well, let's wait another year on the bigger than 4%. It looks like we got 1 year to play with still before it's
I'd like to do the 4%. I think we're pushing on in a lot of areas. We're looking toward the future, and that will put more pressure on you next year and us. But I think that's the best way to proceed.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Is that the extent of the presentations? Nope. What, one more?
And then we
Oh,
have
okay.
general budget.
I know that.
It's gonna push us
Oh.
closer to not after 9.
Uh-oh. All right, talk fast.
I'll go my quickest. Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners. Brian Johnson, City Engineer. Before I get started, I do want to thank Leon, Karen, and Bill for getting us those 3 proposals tonight. You know, obviously policy is one thing that is not fun to work on, but it sets you up for the future. And it sets you up for decades as you go down the road. So I just want to give a shout out to them and thank them for working through that. Also, I want to thank the finance staff, Rebecca and Rena, for getting us these numbers tonight. They do a whole lot of work behind the scenes that you guys don't see, and just want to give them a quick shout out. So real quickly, 2023 Stormwater Update, Brian Johnson, City Engineer. Agenda for tonight, background, some anticipated current and 5-year fee structures. Community survey, we did get some new information on that you saw a couple weeks ago. Our anticipated fee structures through 2027. Comparable cities, and then an update on our fee and lieu program that you had asked about, Commissioner Morris, and then talk a little bit about our tributary stream and detention policy. So again, background, funds, expenses, and revenues. Revenue was overachieved again this year, just a little bit, which is always a good thing. Again, it really shows that model that we developed back in 2015 is working well. We didn't overpromise and we didn't underdeliver, so we're very happy with how that model's working. Expenses were just a little bit over what we anticipated too. A lot of that goes back to what Rob was talking about earlier with mowing on the levee and some different landscaping and mowing and upkeep on some waterways that we've been working on. Again, our goal originally was to flatten those costs between residential and commercial. So if you have a 5-gallon bucket of water that runs off your property, you pay the same as Walmart. That's the goal. Total bill, again, is based off volume of runoff. Community survey, you can see, if you recall from 2018, stormwater was actually the highest negative. That's a double negative there. My statistics daughter would yell at me for that, but there was a double negative of it doesn't work well and we don't like it. So we've been working pretty hard on several large CIP projects. We had the downtown one that was finished several years ago. We've been doing some larger detention. Leon managed a major project over at Little Kitten in Plymouth with some major stormwater infrastructure over there over the last year. So we've got some comparatively better responses from the general public. We're at about 55% positive. Again, more from the community survey. Quality stormwater infrastructure and drainage, about 33%, or 1 out of every 3 people say it should be the top priority. Then to our anticipated fee structure. So currently we're at $2 right here for the levy surcharge. If you remember, we set up that $2 based on what we thought that the bond payments were going to be on a 20-year bond for the levy project. At that time, we thought we'd go to $2.25 at some point in the future, and that point is now. So we're going to request a 25-cent levy surcharge increase in 2024. And then in 2027, we don't see any increases between now and then. But when that final note payment comes due, we'll have a better idea of what our costs are and then what our rates are and what we need to balance. Again, the goal of the fee structure is whatever our payments are offset by what our revenue is. So it's a zero net sum. We're not going to charge any more money for administration or people or anything like that. Future CIP projects, there's your TCB North Channel that you were just asking about. As Randy explained, he's got some utilities in the way that we're going to get relocated, and then as soon as the box at Casement and Hayes is done, we're going to bid this project. This project carries more water to those big massive boxes on Casement and Hayes, picks up stormwater north of Bluemont, tries to carry that water north instead of south down the Pretty Ditch. As we all know, the Pretty Ditch is a 2-year capacity, so about a 2.5-inch rain, that thing's full. And then as we look out, I do have some asterisks on these, so 2026, 2024. These are projects that we had to move, and you can see the year that they were originally programmed, and then the year that we've moved them to in order to keep our fund balances positive. You'll see that graph in just a minute, and I do want to circle back and talk about these a little bit. We did raise the anticipated project costs on these anywhere from 10 to 20% just due to inflation, because remember these costs were developed in 2015, 2016 with the master plan, so we've kind of accounted for some inflation in those. Of course, you always hope that you've over-accounted and that your costs are less than what you anticipate. So here's our
Wait a minute.
2023
Does that
fund.
mean you've moved the Casement Road to 2030?
That's what we're proposing, yes.
We're never going to get it done. We always move it further down the road. It's always last.
I don't disagree, and we have the money in the stormwater fund. The problem is the project's about $8 million. I have a $6 million street delta that I have no funding for. That's where that project sets. Wyatt was kind enough to set aside some trail money for that project. So we have about $3 million total pledged to that project, but I still have a $5 million delta. And it's street money, so I can't use utilities to do anything with it.
I just haven't known that it was being put off again.
Well, that's what we're proposing.
What is that project? So you're doing the street with curb and gutter and stuff on Casement?
Correct.
And what is this? This is an upgrade of?
This project, so during that street project, we would put all of that stormwater underground, those open ditches.
Okay, so that solves that.
Yeah, so that solves that. We'd go with the 3-lane section, curb and gutter, trail on the west side, sidewalk on the east side.
Okay. But you can't put in the stormwater to the road. It's a same time deal.
It creates issues if you put the stormwater in first, yeah, because, how do you don't have inlets to capture that water and get it into the inlet, correct?
Okay.
So 2023 fund balance, you can see we're over here, we're meeting our expectations. Stormwater fund is just like Randy's water and wastewater fund. The recommended balances are 3 months of payments plus all your CIP. Same exact equation. So 2023, meeting expectations, of course, as the levy payments come on and other CIP payments come on, that recommended fund balance goes up while you're also making payments, so your fund balances go down. Again, 2027 was the low point, if you remember. It was down in here. We moved some projects out in order to get our fund balances a little bit better into the out years. One difference between water and wastewater and stormwater, we budget out to 2040 just because our projects are usually a 20-year note. And so projects I do today, you're still going to be paying for in 2040. So I want to show that in my spreadsheet, which is what we're showing here. This is with a 2, this is incorrect. This should be with the 225 surcharge. So these funds are shown with that 225 surcharge, not the 2. Comparable fees for comparable cities. Like Randy, we've seen 10 to 15% raises from the other cities in the stormwater funds. Recall that Wichita and Hutch dedicate about 2 mills to their stormwater fund. So, Wichita, that's got to be $3 to $5 million. I can't imagine what a mill would be in Wichita. It's got to be a huge number. Lawrence, us, Overland Park, Topeka, Lenexa, all no general fund money in it. It's all based on fees. They were all 8 to 10 to 12 to 15% increases. And then here we are with our $10 right now. So this is what we are today. Of course, as you go through the list, you can see kind of where we fall in the middle. Again, this is a statistic we added last year. So 50% of our businesses pay less than 50% a month. So 50% of our businesses are actually in this range right here. So we show these big outliers, the Walmarts of the world. There's not a lot of those. AIBs of the world, Kansas Farm Bureau. There's not a lot of those, but we want to show those outliers to see what they look like. Again, 75% of our businesses pay less than 100, so only 25% pay more than that. And then as you go down the list,
When a property is vacant for several years, the owner still has to pay these costs, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. We have had some property owners come into us and when they've dozed or raised the land, they put it back in grass and we've lowered their stormwater bill. But if they have a parking lot on it,
I was thinking AIB, okay.
yeah, gravel surface, yeah, they're still paying through their water bill.
All right,
Yep.
thanks.
Then again, down to our top 10% pay about $500 a month, so you're looking at about 100 businesses total in the city. Top 2%, so maybe 10 businesses in the city are paying this, and then the 1% is there's like 2 or 3 that are paying this number. So again, you're talking the Walmarts, Targets, Home Depots, Menards, big, giant, massive, lots of paving everywhere. So back to our levy surcharge again, our request is to bump it to $225 in order to keep the revenue and the bond payment the same. Again, our surcharge revenue is going to equal our bond payment. We might come down from $225 once all the pluses and minuses are all added up on the levy. We probably won't know till 2026, 2027 when that final bill comes from the Corps. So our fee in lieu program, wanted to touch on that again real quick. No completed applications this year. This slide is actually old. We actually got one this afternoon for Hostetler Drive. They're doing a large business expansion. They requested to do fee in lieu. We were very happy to let them do it just based on the topography of where they are. They're off Hostetler Drive, it's flat as a pancake. And they're by our well fields and they're by all sorts of things we don't want water underground by. So we just processed this one today. So there is one that's done. We do have these 3 that we're talking with individuals about. I think Hostetler Drive was around $40,000 was their fee to go in lieu. These other ones are that or more. I think total there's about $200,000 in fee in lieu that we're discussing with people on. Our proposal for next year when we come back in November would be a 10% increase in that fee in lieu because we're seeing construction prices like everybody else go up. And at the end of the day, this is a voluntary program. If developers don't want to pay for it, they can go do their own thing. So this is, again, voluntary. They don't have to do it. So I do want to talk about this last slide here quick. Before we get to that though, let me ask, are there any questions on what we've done so far, what we've looked at? So one of the things we've looked at over the last couple of months as we've been working through these models is what would it take to keep these projects on track? What would that look like? Because obviously our graph is concave down and then it's concave up. If we develop the graph that would be concave down all the way and match, obviously your rate increases out here would be significantly less, while your rate increases through here would be more. And what is that number? We don't know yet. We're going to come back to you in November with some sort of a proposal to what that would look like in order to keep these big, massive, they are a game changer. They change how water flows throughout the city. They're massive CIP projects. We're going to come back to you with what that looks like, whether that's 10 cents or whether it's $10. We don't know. We're going to run the models and we're going to figure out what it is though. And we want to come back to you and talk to you about that. Obviously, we're concerned about kicking projects down the road too. Are we ever going to get to these things? Because they're so massive and huge, they just take a big chunk and a big bite out. So that's something we're going to come back to you with probably in November, what that looks like. Is that 10 cents or $10? We don't know. But we want to find out and we want to give you the answer to that. And then you can figure out if that's something you want to think about or not. Initially, our thoughts are we would take the fee in lieu line item and we'd put those surcharge dollars in there, those special project CIP dollars in with the fee in lieu so that we'd generate that money at the same time. So we'd have one line item that's not in O&M, that's pulled out of O&M. That way we don't get into O&M with these dollars. But those are all things that we're going to talk about coming up in November.
Is any of the stuff that we've done downstream, like around the whole Yuma, Juliet, Manhattan, is that going to solve any of the Aggieville flooding yet, or is there still that gap between Aggieville and...
There's still a gap.
Yeah, that's the interceptor that we need to...
That's your Kearney pieces, yeah. So when you look back at this list, that's these Kearney outfalls and lower Kearney.
So the South Manhattan Interceptor, that gets water out of Aggieville to this
It gets water off of 14th and
park area.
Anderson, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
that flooding.
There's a triple point there, so there's three things that are happening at that specific block, which is highly unusual. You've got water coming down from campus, well, from the football stadium. You got water coming down Campus Creek. They both get to that area and then they overflow. And some water goes over towards Bluemont, some water goes down 14th Street, but you have a triple point there where you've got a lot of things going on. Both of these are intended to get to that area.
That's why we need multiple.
That's why I need
exit
two
points.
straws.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Wow, we need those so bad too.
I know. I know we do.
Yeah, all right.
It's something we think about a lot, actually. So we did take a conceptual look at the South Manhattan Interceptor about a year ago. I mean, that's where we got this $15 million number. We're going to relook at South Manhattan, and we're going to look at the Kearney Street outfall to see if one of those two maybe is cheaper and maybe gives us more bang for the buck. So we're going to do a little bit of modeling in the next year. Try to pick which one of those two gives us a bigger bang for the buck. We may jump over to Kearney and start working our way up Kearney. That might be the way we come. We don't know yet, but that's what we're gonna find out.
We're digging deep.
I know. I wish I had good, easy answers for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that, any other questions I can answer?
So, re-explain, just to go back, stop at the 225. One more. So what is that? Is that 225 a month per bill, 225 per unit of
Sure.
stormwater? What is the 225?
So the 225 is per equivalent unit. Every residential home in Manhattan pays 1 unit.
Okay.
So their bill will go up 25 cents. If you're the Walmarts of the world and you have 150 equivalent units,
Okay.
yours is going to go up 25 cents times 150.
But it's already up $2 compared to a couple of years ago.
Correct.
Okay, so it's just another quarter
It's a quarter on top of the two. Correct.
per month.
Correct.
Okay, so, all right. So you're asking us what? You're going to come back later this year yet to set the prices for 2024?
Well, we're going to come back later this year with whatever that special projects fee would be.
Okay.
Our recommendation is to go from 10 to 10.75, so 50 cents for the O&M budget, the maintenance budget, all of those capital projects, 25 cents for the levy surcharge, so 75 cents total. So a typical house in Manhattan would pay another 75 cents. We're staying roughly at about 8 to 10% of your overall utility bill. So the overall utility bill in Manhattan is about $100 a month per house. We're fluctuating in that 8 to 10% range.
And are we thinking the final number on the levy is going to be 18 million, 26 million? What's the range these days? Our part, what we think our part will be.
I think what we bid so far is going to come in right on budget. I think we're in pretty good shape.
Which is?
Was it 23 million with all of the pluses, minuses, this, that's, and the others?
Betterments.
We do have some credits that are coming back yet, and that's what's going to take so long is the Corps has to figure out what all of our credits are.
The big, Mayor, the big unknown
Yes.
is Union Pacific.
Oh, we
Yeah.
have that figured into that.
And we gave you a range and a briefing on that previously.
Yeah.
That's the unknown.
Is that included in the 23, we think, an allowance for that?
We hope so.
Okay, but
But
it's not a guarantee.
it'll,
No, we're
What-
still in negotiations.
Okay.
what's gonna be inflation,
At high railroad rates and all that stuff.
yeah.
Okay, thanks. What else? Got any other questions for Brian? All right.
Thank you.
Gary, you got any
Good
questions? left?
briefing, and I'm glad that we got those things leveled out, so everybody's paying the same for runoff.
You pay the same as Walmart does, yes.
That was
Or
old years ago, and we've done that with the water rates too, so.
actually, Walmart's paying what you are because they were getting a discount.
That's true, so we've done good work on that the past few years.
Thank you.
Technically, you should If you want to continue the meeting, you should make a motion.
We have to have a motion to
We
continue.
want to keep
9:30.
hanging
Up
out?
to 9.
No,
You go home?
we don't want to.
We need some direction on.
We used up all of our time.
So what the other thing was to talk about overall budget stuff?
Yep. We should be able to get
Too late.
pretty quick. and,
15 minutes? Half an hour?
Say up to.
It takes as long as it takes. This is the budget we're talking about here.
Well, but it's not the final talk about the budget, but
You need a motion to extend the meeting.
up to 9:30.
Okay, I move we extend the duration of the meeting up to 9:30.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, been a motion made to extend the meeting up to 9:30 because we're supposed to stop at 9 o'clock on work sessions. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Hattasol.
Yes,
Motion passes.
okay. You got up to 20 minutes. Okay.
Well, this evening, we're just looking for direction for ultimately what to publish in the paper. Obviously, our residents received their revenue neutral rate notices from the county recently. Our mill levy hasn't changed in our discussions since that point in time. You could give us different direction this evening, but making those consistent might help alleviate some confusion to the public if we publish the same rate. This is an overview of the overall budget of the city. General funds, special revenue funds, utilities, bond and interest, and then our internal service funds. $226,269,744 is our estimated budget. Comparing to last year, we were at $188 million. The change in the budget's 37. Change due to increase in cash balances is significant. We have obviously change in non-cash balance line items as well. The mill levy, as I mentioned, was reduced from 52,154 down to 50.470. That'll generate $35 million in property taxes. That's $1.9 million over where we were last year. And again, just looking for special revenue funds. This is an area of the budget that's somewhat duplicative in terms of what we talk about from a budgeting perspective. It's a lot of different funds that we have and the balances of those funds that we need to budget for. We talk about the general fund a lot, but these special revenue funds are a big part of us funding the police department, us special street and maintenance, our rec and trail sales tax, our other sales tax funds, Eco-Devo, those dollars coming in and having balances in those funds. September 5th is a public hearing. We'll have a public hearing not only on the budgeted amount you ask us to publish tonight, but that revenue neutral rate. We'll also consider first reading of the budget. And then the 19th would be the second consideration. October 1st, we would then publish the tax rate, our ordinance, and certify to the county clerks. So again, looking for that direction. If you're comfortable with the mill levy at the 50.47, it's a cap. You can always reduce it. The only thing you can't do is increase it. Revenue neutral rate already prevents you from increasing it, so the 50.47 going out in publication would match that rate. Any questions on the budget?
Are we adequately funding the street budget we hear lots of complaints about
Well, we never
maintenance?
adequately fund the state budget.
Well, I know, but it's good to talk about it is all.
Yeah, and I think
Raise
Rob
the
gave
issue.
you a pavement condition index presentation not too long ago. I think you got to see a lot of red and orange and some green in our community. For years, we talked about increasing our general fund allocation towards street maintenance. We had some trouble raising the mill levy to do that. We put a sales tax out there. That sales tax is it'll expire in 2026. So we still have 3 more years left on that sales tax. Rob has been providing you reports on how he's using that money as well as in-house resources. Do we have enough? That's really a question only the four of you can answer. By way of budgeting, we again, the pavement condition index indicates there's a lot of work out there to do. They're making progress. The pavement condition index, I think, is hovering around 70, but I do think you saw in your last presentation that we could use another $1.5 million a year to keep that PCI around 70.
Or 30% of our roads are crap,
Yep.
is the other way of looking at that.
But most communities are hovering around 70. You can
That's the
spend
norm.
$2.5, $3 million more a year and hover around 80.
That's the norm then?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, in the other direction, I think we do need to look at how we can get this number down some. I know a lot of people like to say, well, tell me what you want to cut. And what a lot of people tell me is actually a lot of the same things I say over and over again is efficiencies. Businesses and people out there, need to always come back and figure out how to do things better and more efficiency. And I think we need to get on some sort of program where we're doing the same thing. The other that I brought up before is we've got a lot of positions that we haven't filled over again, and we're adding on top of those positions. So I think we need to take a look at, do we really need to do that? If the new position is what we really need, can we eliminate some of those we've lived without for who knows how long? I heard Wynn say, yeah, we need to spend for the extra 4 people for this and the extra 3 people for that. That's fine. Let's find where we can get those people out someplace else in the budget. We had the one where I know me and it wasn't mayor then, but we went at it. We added that personnel person because of the new building, which we said maybe we're going to hire or not hire. And I was very frustrated because we built that building to be efficient by bringing everyone together. And then we said that efficiency meant we had to add a person, which to me is totally backwards. I'd never be able to get a new building approved by saying I was going to have to add. So did we add that person because we said we're going to come back and look at it? And if we didn't, we don't need it. And if we did, I'd still like to find out why we really needed an extra personnel person when we didn't increase the number of personnel and in fact brought people together from a wide variety of areas, which you would think would be much easier to manage. I know brought up the culture issues and those other things. But I still think we have an obligation to go look back, and we set a cap, but we need to see how we can get this number down still some.
And we can talk about this more in September, in $226 million budget. We could talk all day long about what we're doing and what we're not doing. For several years, the commission, we ultimately would ask, where do you want the mill levy? We'll manage it. You want it lower than that? Then lower it. We'll manage it. It's kind of the barometer for a lot of things, but I would argue our mill levy is so small compared to what we have coming in and what we manage on a whole scale that you want it to be 49, we can make that work. Every time we lower it, it's kind of like Randy said, you got to look out 3 to 5 years and what that revenue or loss of revenue is doing to your cash balances. We're unique in that area, in my opinion. There's plenty of cash there right now. We've talked about it for years. We're in a position now we rarely have ever been in. You go back to 15 through 21, that mill levy just kept getting ratcheted down. Revenues were coming down. We were cutting. We were eliminating. A lot of things not really noticeable, but we were not spending our budgets. We're still not spending our budgets. We're operating in a manner that is watching our revenues. We're trying to keep that balance where we need to be. Mill levies, you've heard me say it too many times. I don't want to necessarily be a broken record, but in a $45 million general fund, you got $4 million coming in.
No, I know that, but I'm worried more about the overall rate of growth of the total budget.
Sure.
Than that. 226, that's like 20% over what it was before. And then you're not even going to spend that. You may only spend 90% of what that budget was. So that's almost more like 30%. more than before.
And we have a lot of new cash coming in.
True, true.
And it's highlighted by this graph, again, more cash than we actually have on the expense side in terms of differences between last year's budget and this year's. So it's just a substantial amount of revenue. I mean, I get back into the mill levy discussion because that's ultimately where a lot of constituents are looking at their tax bills and how we're doing things. You know, that we do have a number of positions. I think we owe you a little bit more explanation on positions in terms of our turnover rate. And if we can make some headway on our turnover rate, I think we would probably have more positions filled. We also like to budget for circumstances that may or may not occur. We hope they don't occur, but emergencies, overtime, being fully staffed in certain areas, we know we would be in a crunch if we were to experience those emergencies, those natural disasters, those occurrences within our community that we'd rather not see, but our budgets reflect fully staffed, fully capable of paying that overtime to handle that event. We set those budgets out there, but we don't spend them. I mean, historically we haven't, but we still build them in the event we need to.
Right, well, that's where I come back. We build increases on top of a budget that we never actually used. So we have a compounding increase.
But your point would be the property tax for the general fund is not part of that real discussion, because the city part that goes to those things is very small. I had a better way of explaining that a second ago, but yeah.
Yeah, we're 17 mills. We, the city, our operation is just
I get
actually
that.
under 17.
Like, that's why I said I'm more worried about the total cost versus that.
Yeah,
one
and
segment.
you know, we know the revenues have to meet the expenditures on the state budgeting side.
So in case we have to spend all that money, we gotta.
You've got the authority to do it.
And
If not, we're back here with an amendment to get that authority. And there are fund balances. We'll be back to you all for amendments in order for us to move some money around and be able to spend it, because you anticipate us spending it.
No, I get you, but in essence, in some ways, to me, you're almost saying, trust me, we're being lean and mean, give me this big cushion, and I'll manage it always to be the small amount. That's just foreign to me. I'm always like,
Understood.
It's like, I'm not gonna give you that much cushion because I wanna get you to be as efficient as possible, and it's just natural to not be as pressed if you've got that cushion. If you got a budget you didn't spend, I give you a lot of money over that budget, and you're saying I'm only gonna spend what I need to. Again, I never had that luxury.
Well, I think the barometer that I keep coming back to as well is the cash balance. It is truly the reflection of our expenditures and our revenues in the general fund. Now, the utility, you saw the balances, it's no different. When they go to really look at how they're operating from a revenue and expenditure standpoint, it's that cash balance. And it's why when it slips down, the alarms start going off in terms of rate hikes, mill levy hikes, some sort of revenue hike in order to get that cash balance back up. The focus on the total budget of $226 million is more reflective, in my opinion, of where this community is going and the revenues and the expenditures. But if you really want to watch how we're performing, like you would your own checking account, you're going to look at that cash balance.
True. But I guess maybe we need a different number to look at. Let's just get what we'd call the expense budget, and what was the expense budget from the year before, and what's the expense budget for this year.
Yeah.
And let's look at that and take that noise out of there and say, how much are expenses really going up in total, and how much, again, not just compared to budget, but what we think we're really going to spend, and how much are we compounding extra cost into the pipeline, because that's the way we're doing it.
The other point I would make on the personnel side, our turnover rate is keeping up at a pace. It's very difficult for us to actually advance in terms of actual people working throughout the year. This is still recovering from 2 years ago. 3 years ago. We are not making up a lot of ground in our departments. We still have 15 to 20 in Public Works, 15 to 20 in Park and Rec, of positions that were budgeted. We just can't make up ground in that recruitment.
And that's where I'm saying, instead of adding to those numbers, why don't we do the investment to try to get those hired versus adding on to them? And now we're looking at trying to get 40 instead of 30, and we can't even get the 30.
Understood.
So,
Before time's up, I am interested in, so when we committed to building the joint maintenance facility, it was done on the grounds that we were going to be much more efficient. Have we done any kind of report at all about the efficiencies that we've gained and how much our budget might be smaller because of that facility and how we've consolidated efforts? Or is that another to-do item?
Well, we haven't been in there a year yet. so
Well, I
it's kinda
know.
hard to do
Yeah.
a detailed analysis.
But in April, it will be coming.
Yeah, I think we could easily provide you where we were and where we're at today with a lot of our facilities and our people.
Even an
The
estimate.
efficiencies, what was that? Mary?
Even an estimate would help with John's concern about justifying.
Yeah, because we did a big investment, capital investment, to be
But-
more efficient.
And you're right, we haven't had a year, but I would imagine we are developing a track record that would be helpful. Thanks, I just wanted to, ultimately,
yeah, is the turnover any less now that they're not laying out there in 100-degree heat? Or is the equipment are we gonna be able to, maintain our equipment 2 years longer per item because it's now in the shade? Or, I know those are some of the efficiencies we're hoping to get. I don't know if we're gonna get manpower efficiency.
Well, if they don't have to run around to find
Yeah, if
things,
they-
and they're more there, can communicate.
Yeah, hopefully they're all, there's something like that, but, so when people complain about the budget going up 37 million, 21 of it is cash. So there's only the 15.7. What is the 8162,292 special revenue fund? Any ideas, Rena or Rebecca, where most of that money is coming from if it's not all cash carryover? What would that stuff, is there any large lump thing that would translate to?
That previous slide.
Yeah, the social revenue funds, it's going up 13 million, 5,200 of it is increased cash, 8162 is increased other stuff. Is there one or two things that's driving that?
The reason I went to the next slide, the 82 million for the 2024 budget, this is 95% of that.
Okay, it's all those things.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just a combination of just the various expenses. So, I mean, you will have like your rec and sales tax fund. We'll be doing a budget amendment for that. Sales tax fund, you'll have that, as well as EcoDevo. There's just expenditures associated.
So
with
that's not a lot
expenditures.
of necessary out of the taxpayers' pockets of new things, that's just.
Correct. So if you look at this particular slide, you'll have your property tax supported funds. And so those would be employee benefit, fire equipment reserve, fire pension, library employee benefit, Raleigh County Police Department, and then our downtown TIF. And some of those, like the downtown TIF, they'll have an increase in sales tax. RCPD, they'll have an increase based on their budget that they
Okay.
propose.
That was pretty easy.
I didn't see what the asterisks were for that.
No, you're fine. And so then that next column is your state and sales tax funds. And so again, EcoDevo, that new 2023 sales tax, and then as well as our sales tax has increased in total, not necessarily the city sales tax side of things, because a majority of that is now going into EcoDevo. But we'll have to amend the budgets for some of these funds for 2023 to be able to spend those. So sales tax, again, downtown TIF, as well as probably employee benefit, and there's some others.
Okay. All right, we got 7 minutes left. What else we need to?
I wanted to, if you could go back to that slide with that published mill levy, the 50. There it is. Okay, and I saw that as a starting point, not the final point. And that's what I've told people. I mean, I was happy that we managed to get some of it off of there. But my understanding was the library was gonna try to reduce their increase to about 6%. Have they done that yet?
Yes, sir, they did. The budget that they presented is less than what they originally presented.
So they haven't changed it?
No, they did
says
change.
Less than what they
4%.
originally presented. So what's presented today is less than what they presented back in June.
Okay, so that lowered our number?
No, they just went to, because we wanted 6%, so they lowered it, something else must have went up to make the difference.
Yeah, because I don't see a change in the mill levy. I mean, I figured if the library fund mill levy went down, then our total number should have gone down.
We can look at that mill levy analysis from June to now, and the first time we presented to now, and get that information for you.
Send that out to us. We can see what changed.
Yeah, if we get the other chart, we can figure it out.
Because, I agree with John. We got a lot of folks up there upset, and I also understand your analysis that, not a whole lot of this really is on the city's part, but we need to see if there's some things there that we can look at, and maybe that HR position. We got technology, why can't you sit in the HR office and just have a TV screen and people could punch on it and talk? That's how I used to do it at Barton. I didn't have HR people everywhere, and we had 3 campuses, one at Leavenworth, one at Fort Riley, and one at Great Bend. So that's the efficiencies that John's talking about. That's a specific example. And hire an extra person, that makes no sense. We can take that off there. And then I'll just repeat the same thing I've said every year. We need to look at that travel budget. We need to look at all those dues we're paying. Last year I asked for a list of, all the various people that we pay dues to, and I didn't get a complete, accurate list I could look at. But I still think, and I know Linda won't like it, why are we members of Town and Gown? I don't see a return. Why did we allow an increase to $45,000 to the regional council? Are we really getting $45,000 of value out of that? And I know some people would say yes, but I disagree. I'm not saying we need to completely jump out of that organization, but that whopping increase that they hit us on, the fees makes no sense. And I think the citizens want us to take a real hard look at everything like that and say, okay, what can we chop out of here? And if our sales taxes are going up and Ecodevo money's going up, maybe we should tap into that to plug some of the holes. That's not gonna degrade efficiencies or anything, it's just taking the money out of a different pot, rather than, having to amend the budget so we can spend it. If we gotta put some of that in the streets, fine. Because I believe in the essential services. But that's sort of where I'm at. I would like to be able to, tell people, okay, we're gonna publish the 50.470, because that's where we are today, but that doesn't mean that's gonna be the final budget. We're gonna try to whittle something out of that in as smart a way as we possibly can. 3 minutes, Mayor.
Okay. Jason, anything else?
Nope, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Sorry, Gary. Well, you got 1 minute.
Less than that. I've had the opportunity to visit with the county and the school district, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to visit with you in the 30 seconds that I have. I want to remind you of KSA 7929. I found it a few weeks ago. You may already be familiar with it. It says, proposed budget amendments, public hearing notices, publication and contents prior to the filing of the adopted budget. With the county clerk, the governing body of each taxing or political subdivision municipality shall meet for the purpose of answering and hearing objections of taxpayers relating to the proposed budget. And I'm just telling you, like I've told these other bodies, it's a great opportunity with this statute because it says you need to answer. So it won't be a monologue. When I step up to object to the budget, it's time for answers. And that's going to be different because most of the time when people step up for the budget, everybody just looks at them and then they go sit back down. But statute says answering. So I plan to object. I want you to know ahead of time, so you're not surprised, like I told the school district and like I told the county. Thanks.
Good. All right, I will close public comment. Go ahead.
We wouldn't have been surprised.
Here we go. Okay, we got 2 minutes, Ron, to wrap up the city manager briefing.
Well, I will go quickly. There were some, in your mail folders last night, there was some documents relative to the East Manhattan Gateway as far as the proposed structure for the steering committee and the joint nature of the city and the Potawatomi County. So please look that over. I'd be happy to have some feedback, or to Stephanie, if there's something about that you don't like. Would like to see some changes. That we'll have that item on the consent agenda for the 5th as well, for that formation, to the contract with Stantec, and then also moving forward with forming that committee. At the same time, we've launched the efforts to announce for the steering committees of the Seco Park project, as well as the Move MHK. We've already awarded the Seco Park item, but the MHK is on the 5th as well, so that'll have those correspondence. So if there's some things about that you would like to provide some feedback on, please contact us. And then in the moment of time, if you have questions about anything that's on the planning chart, please contact me, and I'm happy to elaborate on it.
Where are we on the Move MHK Steering Committee? Are you appointing, is that in the material you've sent us?
It is. It was in last night's mail folder on the process.
Okay, I didn't see it. Okay.
Okay, since we're out of time, I move to adjourn the August 22nd, 2023 City Commission work session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes.
Mayor Hattasol,
Yep.
Commissioner Butler.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, no meeting next week. We'll see you